UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back, of course, tomorrow right here on Talk. So Iran warning the United States to expect heavy consequences for those strikes on its nuclear sites, threatening that American involvement in the conflict with Israel will expand the scope of legitimate targets. What do they mean by that? And is it reasonable to say that Donald Trump has made the world a safer place? We'll look more into that in a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, Palestine Action activists have moved their protest to Trafalgar Square today after being banned from Parliament, with the government poised to label the group a terrorist organisation following those attacks on RAF planes. I mean, if you attack military kit and plant and aircraft, then that, I would say, is an act of terrorism, right? By definition. And furious neighbours say they're afraid to let their kids out of sight after discovering a Rochdale rape gang ringleader is still living freely on their streets. We've reported on this a number of times over the years, throwing parties and apparently using a legal loophole to avoid deportation. Again, under that bracket of you can't make it up. We'll have more on that a little later as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. I think we made this point last week. I was just talking to somebody in the office about this. If you asked people 100 years ago, what will the world look like in 2025? They go, well, there probably won't be any wars because they'd have got through all that palaver at that stage and everybody would kind of be getting along. It's kind of got what? It doesn't feel like the usual order of events when we're asking countries to ramp up spending on defence. As the years go on, we should be spending more. Now, I understand we should. But what a crying shame we're in this position. We're mostly in this position because of despotic terror regimes like Iran, for example. President Trump carried out, of course, what he called a successful bombing attack on 3 nuclear sites on Iran at the weekend. He said they've been obliterated. On Sunday, the Pentagon said it will take time to fully assess the effect of the attack, though it appears all sites sustained extreme severe damage. That is their quote. Israel say they were in full coordination with the US in planning the strikes, and Iranian officials have confirmed the facilities were struck, but they denied that it suffered any kind of major blow. This is, whatever way you slice it, a significant escalation in the ongoing war between Iran and Israel. This was called Operation Midnight Hammer, and man, this was big. 125 US military aircraft, 7 B-2 stealth bombers, 3 nuclear targets attacked. The Pentagon said, just to give you a little bit of background here, I think this is worth hearing, the bombers set off from the US on an 18-hour flight with some, I mean, how, as a pilot, I mean, man alive, you've got to really hand it to the absolute nature, the physical and mental demands of that job. An 18-hour flight before you've actually started work. Some heading west into the Pacific as acting as a kind of a decoy, while the main strike package made up of 7 B-2 bombers proceeded to Iran. And just before the aircraft entered Iranian airspace, more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from a US submarine at various targets. And as the bombers entered the Iranian airspace, the US deployed several deception tactics. They have to use decoys and all this kind of stuff, with fighter jets clearing the airspace ahead of them so they can check for enemy aircraft or surface-to-air missiles and that kind of thing. So the lead B-2 then dropped 2 GBU 57 massive ordnance penetrators, MOPs, also known as bunker busters, onto one nuclear site. A total of 14 of these things were dropped on 2 target areas. This was huge. I mean, the damage absolutely enormous. Iran saying there's going to be implications to this. In fact, when Starmer, or here's David Lammy's quote, he was asked about the legality of the bombings. He said, It's for the Americans to discuss those issues. I don't say it's not legitimate, he says. We were clear when this began we would not be involved. But the question is, should we be involved as the US fights off a medieval death cult whose one purpose in life is to obliterate Western freedoms and values and get everybody supporting a sort of weird, twisted version of their faith? This is where we're at. And if anybody thinks Iran is somehow the good guys, I just wonder when I see this, what's the litmus test for coming to that conclusion? Because as all this was happening, we had a Palestinian protest going on, I think it was Saturday in the capital. There's the Palestine Action, another bunch of weirdos making their placards ready at the weekend for today's march of the brain cells. They claim to be for the Palestinian people, but you just know it's the whole thing. This shower of shirkers love anything that's a bit anti-West, whether it's Palestine, whether it's Iran. And when I say anti-West, particularly the United States, particularly Israel, particularly the United Kingdom. One march at the weekend saw several of these nutjobs waving placards that said things like "Freedom for Iran." And this was the best one. "Choose the right side of history," referring to the mafia don of terrorism, the Iranian Ayatollah. Literally holding a placard with his face on saying, "Choose the right side of history." Where does that come from? That kind of odd, inverted, twisted, upside down, black is white, night is day type thinking come from? Over there, there's a terrorist regime, the puppet master of all terrorism in the Middle East. These people are at it non-stop. They were trying to build a nuclear deterrent. Most of that has been bombed away, we hope. That, I hope, makes us a safer place. But do you concur? Has Trump made the world safer as a result of these attacks at the weekend? 0344 499 1000. And your wider view on what is happening over there. We'll take calls on that. You can message 87222. And, of course, you can leave a voice message on the number 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Reem Ibrahim is back with us, Communications Manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Reem, good afternoon to you.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you?
Good as gold at this, and nice to have you with us. Let's go straight into that big story then, of course. I mean, absolutely huge at the weekend as the Middle East war continues. The US Embassy in Qatar has told American citizens in the country to shelter in place until further notice. This is obviously very, very high stakes stuff, even if the American onslaught was successful. Let's have a listen, though, to our own Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, speaking on the situation yesterday.
Well, we've long had concerns about the Iranian nuclear programme and been very clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The US has now taken action to alleviate that threat. It is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region, and get the parties back around the table to negotiate. And I've been speaking with international leaders this morning to that end. So I want to reassure the British public that we're doing everything we can to stabilise the situation, to de-escalate the situation, and to get to a negotiated outcome. But I'm very clear in my own mind that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That is the greatest threat to stability in the region.
But kind of stopping short, Reem, to saying I support the action of America. Obviously, it was nothing to do with us. Mr. Starmer, we understand, did get notice that it was going to happen.
Yes, I mean, it's absolutely awful, and it really does signal some of the significant tensions globally that we're seeing over the last few years. And now this is really broken out. I mean, this is significant. This is the first time we're seeing active warfare with the Iranian state. I mean, we're even seeing reports literally in the last 10 minutes of Iran and Israel announcing different government and military strikes to one another. Tehran has been in receipt of some of that as well as Israel. So it's really interesting. We're seeing a lot of it unfold literally in the last few minutes. Some of that tension really being seen as well. I mean, it's awful. I think from our perspective in the UK, we want to ensure that we are supporting our American allies, that we are being seen as people, organisations and governments that are supporting pro-Western perspectives, and the Iranian state are not our friends, and they fund terrorist organizations across the world. I wouldn't be surprised if the terror threat in the West actually increases as a result of what's going on at the moment. But it's absolutely something to be concerned by and something we should be monitoring on an ongoing basis.
Do you sense, I mean, it's a tricky question when we ask the question, has Donald Trump made the world a safer place? I mean, on balance, if Iran now has no nuclear capability, they were sort of in the process of taking this forward, then on that basis, yes, it is safer. But of course, Iran talk about a huge response to this. In fact, their words were that they were going to expand the scope of legitimate targets. So, yeah, that would mean maybe isolated individual terror attacks, but certainly as a country, their capability has been somewhat compromised.
Their capability has been compromised, but I don't think we should underestimate what they're capable of, and also their existing links. I mean, as I said, they do fund organizations across the world, whether it be Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis over in Yemen, probably various different organizations that are based in the West. We have no idea. This is very scary, and there is a lot to happen here. But I think that the question of whether or not Trump did the right thing is an interesting one, because he's, up until this point, taken a particularly non-interventionist perspective. He has said that, we shouldn't be intervening in Ukraine. He has said that the government shouldn't be sending taxpayer dollars across the world. We shouldn't be intervening in conflicts that don't concern the US. And yet this situation is particularly different. The conflict between Iran and Israel, I think, in so many ways can be seen as a proxy war for the West versus the Far East, and these particular governments that are authoritarian, that are they behave in pretty horrendous ways. The Iranian regime, whether it be the Iranian regime or the Russian regime, they all behave in particularly awful ways and break international law on a daily basis. So I think definitely from that perspective, it's right for us to defend ourselves. I just hope that the British government, and from the UK perspective, we are actually sort of taking a forefront on this. And I know Zelensky is coming to the UK today, so I think it'll be interesting with the balance from that perspective. What I think I would like to see is the UK government supporting the US and really showing that special relationship is alive, and that we support them in their actions in order to protect the West.
Which is, I mean, all well said from your point of view there, and I would concur with all of that. But there are people who live among us, Reem, that don't think that way. And you saw that at the weekend with the kind of anti-Israel protests. And then you've got this other pack of clowns turning up called Palestinian Action, who love a bit of vandalism on military territory, planes and stuff like that. Holding banners at the weekend, the Ayatollah is the way forward. I mean, who are these people, for God's sake? And then Palestinian Action, this other group, they were the ones that got into Bryce Norton last week. Could be labelled a terror group.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I've got to say, I was really shocked by what happened at Bryce Norton. I've actually flown from Bryce Norton before, when I went to the Falkland Islands earlier this year. So I've been to the base, and I know that it's relatively quite secure. So I was quite surprised by the fact that these protesters were able to get in there. But of course, it's a base. It's just sort of about an hour out of Oxford. It's a lot of effort, a lot of energy to get there. So it's interesting that they decided to do that. I've got to say though, as somebody that does believe in freedom of expression, I don't believe that attacking and destroying property is part of that. But the government's plans to effectively prescribe Palestine Action and put them in the same groups as organisations like Al Qaeda, I think that that's probably a step too far, and probably desensitizes people from the realities of what those actual terrorist organizations are doing. I mean, Palestine Action aren't murdering people on a day-to-day basis, which is what a lot of those organizations
do you know, I had exactly the same. I drew exactly the same conclusion as that, as somebody who's very pro-free speech and liberal values, etc. I don't want a government to be authoritarian enough to simply just willy-nilly prescribe somebody as a terror group because we don't like what they did. Now, what they did was dangerous and it was stupid and we should keep our eye on it. But giving the government that amount of power to simply do that is not a precedent that I want to set. I did think you could have another category just called morons. I mean, maybe that would do it. So they could have, and then every time you turned on the news, they would have to be, because that would be the name of the category. So the newsroom would have to actually make that point and say Palestinian Action, part of the moron list, and that would make great reading, and that would maybe somehow dilute any credibility they thought they had.
Perhaps, or maybe you should be the one that decides what groups are moronic and what groups aren't.
I think so,
quite
yes.
That job, Ian.
I've got a big old list of morons, I have to say. You know, it's growing,
Yes,
growing
I've also
almost,
got my own list.
growing
Maybe
almost by the day.
Reference them.
Yeah, absolutely right. Stay with us, Reem. Loads more still to come. Reem Ibrahim is with us, Communications Manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs, having a look at the big stories of the day. I'd like your response on that question of Donald Trump. Has Donald Trump made the world a safer place, or is Donald Trump making the world a safer place? Somehow you've got to jump through a lot of hurdles to perhaps get to a state of equilibrium. Is that the direction of travel? Do you sense that? And I'm bound to say this, and I don't think this would be the view of many of our audience here on Talk. There's bound to be the odd character out there that thinks, you know what, no, actually, I stand with Iran. Is that you? I just want to speak to one person who says, yeah, I stand with the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah is my man. Is that you? If it is, I'm all ears at this end. 0344 499 1000. You leave a voice note there as well. Or, of course, message 87222. More from Reem coming up in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
The Iranian foreign minister says he's going to meet Putin in Moscow to talk about this. What's your analysis of that?
Iran is helping President Putin in his assault and his illegal war in Ukraine, as we know. And that also is happening through the ballistic missile usage and the stockpiles that come from Russia. President Trump has been telegraphing this message very clearly to Iran. It was during those talks that we all discovered through the IAEA that Iran was basically enriching nuclear material at an unprecedented rate.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
21 minutes after 1, this one comes in from Keith in Shrewsbury. It says, Ian, are you actually serious? So you're saying that a group who break into a military base, sabotage British assets, is not serious enough to be deemed terrorists? Next time, it could be a bomb. Never thought I would hear such guff from you. I would say, slightly in my defence, Keith, the view I put forward is mostly the view that I'm hearing from, if you like, the average free speech libertarian on this specific issue. Of course, you can have acts that are highly dangerous, but a government has to be massively careful. I mean, it's such a knife-edge decision to label a group a terrorist organisation. Now, that doesn't mean to say you don't nudge towards the Venn diagram. This Palestine Action group are known mostly for their graffiti endeavours. That's how they protest. They're half-wits, they're not very bright, and the world might be a better place without them. Do I want my government labelling groups that do that? I mean, I did say at the weekend, on Friday rather, that it looked, that could easily be construed as an act of terror. I'm not suggesting it couldn't be. It was incredibly serious. And the idea that they got in there is actually our fault. Rather, it's their good luck if you're a protester, but our fault, or the air base's fault, for having clearly no security there whatsoever. Reem Ibrahim is with us from the Institute of Economic Affairs, looking at the big stories of the day. Here's one worth a look at. Reem, the BBC newsreader, who corrected herself live on air over the weekend, seemingly challenging gender-neutral language. Let's take a look at what happened to BBC presenter Martine Croxall.
London's School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine has released research which says that nearly 600 heat-related deaths are expected in the UK. Malcolm Mystery, who was involved in the research, says that the aged, pregnant people, women, and those with pre-existing health conditions need to take precautions.
Good for her. What happened there, obviously, Reem, is that was the organisation's press release that was then put by a producer onto the auto cue. Martine, who I know a little bit, decided that, hang on a sec, pregnant people, I ain't having that. So she quickly switched it to women.
Yeah, it is fantastic. I've got to say, the fact that stating biological truth is seen as particularly heroic, I think is interesting, and really does show how far we've gone down the path here. But I think it also does show that actually there has been a shift in the Overton window. I think that even mainstream organisations like the BBC itself, I mean, the fact that presenters at the BBC are really seeing this as the case and really seeing the truth for what it is. And I also think that the Supreme Court judgment does signal a shift in the way in which people view these things. There is a clarification, a legal clarification, that in the Equalities Act, the word woman refers to an adult human female. And I think that that's really, really important as biological sex. The fact that, we're seeing a TV presenter clarifying an auto cue live on air, the fact that she felt as though she had the confidence to do so, she wouldn't have been cancelled for it. In fact, she's being praised for it, I think does signal a positive move in the Overton window.
What I thought was interesting is when you read an auto cue, as I know, you're reading a line ahead, in your head, despite the fact that you're reading out something live, so you're always ahead mentally. And you could hear her slightly slow down as she realised this weird phrase was coming up, and it was beautifully corrected afterwards. And the most sane thing that's happened at the BBC for a long, long time, I think we can safely say. And this story as well, the ringleader of a Rochdale rape gang has avoided deportation using legal loopholes. Local residents in Rochdale are furious that the convicted paedophile has remained in the country. Let's hear from Keir Starmer on this. He was speaking to our own Peter Cardwell here on Talk on the issue of rape gangs.
You have proven you can act quickly and decisively when you want to. Why not direct the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, which you used to lead today, to prioritise catching gang members who have raped children, start solving this today instead of waiting for an inquiry?
Great challenge, and that is exactly what we've done.
How much more money have you given?
So the spending review puts more money towards policing, but the instruction is absolutely clear to go after these vile criminals. I've long said, grooming is an awful crime. I prosecuted the first case best part of 15 years ago. The first time there was a grooming case in our court, I took the decision to prosecute. But I know from talking to victims the impact it has. I've always said the first port of call should be a criminal investigation. Yes, there will now be a national inquiry. There has to be accountability. But for victims and survivors, the most important thing is there's a criminal investigation where there can be, and where perpetrators are convicted, they then go to prison. And that is by far the best and most important way of dealing with this vile offence.
There it is. That was a really good collection of questions, by the way, that Peter Cardwell put to the Prime Minister. in that interview. Just a really good interview of so many areas, but this particular aspect of it, Reem, is deeply disturbing. The idea that somebody who should have been deported using legal and lives in a street publicly. I mean, that tells you quite a lot about some of the neighbours who are probably kind of all right with this guy.
Well, I don't think the neighbours are all right with him, but it is absolutely shocking, some of the details of this particular individual. And this story was broken in the Mail. Kari Ralph, who was one of the 12 Rochdale grooming gang ringleaders, and he is currently living freely. I mean, he used a legal loophole. He dodged it. So he was actually supposed to be in prison for a lot longer. I think it was a 6-year prison sentence. And now he remains in the UK more than a decade later. He was supposed to be in prison. He was then also told he was going to be deported to Pakistan. But he avoided the removal by destroying his passport and then claiming that he was stateless. And then he lost the appeal against deportation in 2018 and was never sent back.
How is he still here? I mean, that's strange. And by the way, when I say somebody, I mean, there's obviously neighbours who are uncomfortable and outraged that this guy lives there, but I reckon there's people around him who would be of a similar thinking, this bloke did nothing wrong, which is kind of what got us into this mess in the first place.
I think that the real issue was the social services and the governmental authorities that failed those young girls. I don't necessarily think that neighbours or sort of the environment around them are necessarily supporting those particular individuals. They probably don't know. I mean, they probably have no... Would you have any idea what kind of people are living on your street these days? I mean, we don't really... True. People move around so quickly. Population in cities has changed so much. I think what's really, really shocking is that the fact that this particular... I mean, we know this happened loads of times, right? People will destroy their documents, they'll claim that they're stateless, and then they are just somehow allowed to stay in the UK. Yep. This person is a convicted paedophile. He was supposed to serve a 6-year sentence, which he didn't, and he was supposed to be deported to Pakistan, which he wasn't. So I think the real question is, why are the authorities so awful at actually convicting these particular people in the first place? And then once they are convicted, why aren't they deported? This person is not a British citizen. If it was a British citizen, I would say they should be rotting in a British cell, but he isn't. He should be deported back to Pakistan. We know that he's from Pakistan, even though he's just decided to destroy his own travel documents. And the real question is, Ian, how many other people are there living amongst us that have been convicted of these absolutely horrendous crimes and are still allowed to be free?
Yeah, spot on. Listen, Reem, thank you for your time. We hit the clock, but great to have you on as ever. Reem Ibrahim, Communications Manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs. You want to pick up on any aspects we've talked about there? I mean, the last story is just, it's beyond any kind of belief that somebody like this still exists on our streets. When they lost an appeal against deportation, they should be gone. I mean, can't that just happen, like, straight away? Can't they just go round there, like, literally, it's like bang on 1:30. Just send the cops round, straight to the airport, back he goes. Done. Job done. Pair of handcuffs on, away you go, mate. We don't want you around here. But I do think there's probably people in that area that would stand by him, which is one of the reasons why this whole kind of rape gang culture was allowed to continue, because there wasn't enough condemnation, even with people within the community who knew that kind of stuff was going on. And one of the reasons, because they had the same view of those girls, right? 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. We'll also pick up on that question of whether Donald Trump, or whether you think Donald Trump has made the world a safer place as a result of those hits on Iran at the weekend. Lines are open. It's 1:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And just in the last few minutes, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has said she has decided to prescribe Palestinian action and will lay an order before Parliament next week, which, if passed, will make membership and support for the protest group illegal. I'm intrigued by the legality of, the wording of prescribe. I'm sure we'll be educated throughout the course of this hour. Prescribe meaning to forbid by law. Does that mean you are always prescribed as a terror group, or does that mean you are simply forbidden regardless? Does it stop short, I guess, is my question, of using the word terror group? We'll take some comment on that. And, of course, we are discussing Iran and America. Iran warning, of course, the United States of heavy consequences for those strikes on its nuclear sites, claiming that American involvement in the Israel conflict will expand the scope of legitimate targets. That's the words of the Iranian regime. Donald Trump mocked Tehran, saying the US hit a bullseye, and using the phrase, make Iran great again. This comes, of course, as our Prime Minister Keir Starmer has cautioned the crisis could escalate beyond the Middle East, with the UK preparing for potential Tehran-backed attacks on British soil. In a moment, we'll speak to Elliot Wilson, writer, former House of Commons clerk on this. He's written a couple of really interesting pieces on this. But first, Chip Chapman is with a senior British military advisor. Chip, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
We asked the question at the beginning, has Donald Trump made the world a safer place? Well, if you're trying to stop a country advancing its nuclear capabilities, then I suppose the answer is yes. But, of course, the question is a little more complicated than that.
Well, it is a little more complicated because we talk often of the bookends of war, and it's the one to the right. How the thing ends is more important than how it starts. In terms of the Israeli objectives, which America has helped to enable, they were really threefold: deny Iranian material needed to make nuclear weapons, destroy the equipment to make their warheads for those weapons, and to get rid of the ballistic missiles. They will still continue to do that third one. Those are military objectives, though. That has to ultimately, in terms of war, aiming to create a better peace, translate into political objectives. And the real one, first one there, should be that Iran renounces any nuclear program, or if they have a civil nuclear program, then enrichment takes place outside the country. But there's this kind of unstated one, and you don't know if Trump is joshing or not about, make Iran great again by regime change or regime collapse. Yeah. And there are various variables around that, of course, and that's the one you really don't know because there are so many variables. And indeed, the thing I've always quoted in the last few years is that General Mark Milley, before the Ukrainian campaign, said there are 3 myths about war. There were actually 5 that we need to let go. The first one, wars will be short. They may not be. The second one, you can win wars from afar just by dropping ordnance. You can't. And of course, this is a war of missiles. It is not a war of land armies butting against each other. Yeah. The third one, in terms of that regime change, is that armies fight wars. They don't. It's nations that fight wars. And it's whether you have that fracture in Iranian society, which leads to regime collapse, which is the interesting one in the next few weeks. Of course, the Basij, the militia organization, and the IRGC have in the 2020, 2022 have killed lots of people when there have been protest movements in Iran. So you need to be pretty fearless or know that there's going to be something afoot because generally, we have to remember that the supreme leader in Iran is the longest serving dictator in the world. He's 86, and there may be fissures around that.
And, of course, it wasn't that long ago when Iran looked as if it was going to be great again until he showed up. But that's a whole other story. And now we're in this position where a response from Iran clearly will not match American military might, the B-2s and goodness knows what else, these incredible bunker-busting bombs that were dropped onto their facilities, etc. But, of course, there's more than one way to fight a war. And, Iran only needs to spread the grim reality of terrorism around the world, and they have begun to match them.
Yeah, and we've already said really for the last 36 years that America's been fighting a twilight war with Iran, and you could always have this sort of prolonged sporadic conflict. Indeed, you might already say that we've had that in the UK. You might recall that in early May there were, I think, 8 people arrested in the UK who were either sponsored by the IRGC or the intelligence service of Iran in trying to silence Iranian dissidents. And one of the things, of course, which limits the blowback of those sorts of activities is the competence of your security agencies. And that's why MI5 were pretty successful in May. Should we expect some of that stuff? Yes, we should. On a more broad order thing, I think that there's an Iranian doctrine called shock and withhold. That is that, of course, they'll keep the shock going if they can on Israeli targets, but they'll withhold attacking across the geographic piece, I think, or the US targets. They might do a Pyrrhic attack, as they did in 2020, when Soleimani was killed in Al-Assad in Iraq and Erbil province in Iraq. But the key thing there was that no Americans were killed. If they do attacks which kill Americans, then the escalation dominance of both Israel and America means that they will get absolutely pummeled. And this is the dilemma for the supreme leader between his desire to show that he's not completely weak and must do something, with the desire, and this is the number one criteria for the supreme leader and the Iranian leadership, which is regime survival followed by domestic security. So their bar is always very low. So I think ultimately they will try and drink from the chalice of poison, as they call it, which they had to do in 1980 in releasing the American hostages, and in 1988 in ending the Iran-Iraq war.
And just a final point, Chip, how do you define Iran? When you look at Iran as a nation as it is today, the various tentacles that it has in all sorts of perhaps nefarious endeavours around that region. And I ask this because, you know, we saw people at the weekend carrying placards saying be on the right side of history with a big picture of the Ayatollah on there. I'm thinking, wow, this is a rather strange. Maybe my history was a bit skew-if, but, you know, if this is the good guy, then crikey, you know, I'm missing something here. What's your definition as a military man of Iran today?
Well, Iran is not the good guy. Iran is at conflict with the West, always had been. The head of MI6 has said that. The thing about Iran at the moment is at its weakest since the 79 revolution. It always thought it was invulnerable because of the proxy forces, of which the jewel in their crown was Hezbollah. That's gone. The fall of Assad means that was the greatest strategic setback for them since the 79 revolution. And the pathway to aerial dominance, which allows the Americans and Israelis to take as much or as little as they want, because the predominant factor of success in 20th century warfare was control of the air, means that if you want to achieve success over this terrible regime, now is probably the time to do it. But if you think supporting the Ayatollah is a progressive right thing to do, then I think you're absolutely barking, because one of the things that the Israelis hit today in Palestine Square in Tehran was the Israeli destruction clock. This is a regime which would like to exterminate Israel as a country. That's been part of their doctrine.
Yeah. Listen, Chip, always great to get your qualified view on these things. Thank you, sir. Chip Chapman, Senior British Military Advisor. Let's go to word with Elliot Wilson, writer and former House of Commons clerk. Elliot, good afternoon to you. Just give us your overarching take then, if you would, on what is happening here. I know you've written a couple of pieces about this, particularly the United Kingdom's position on this so far. What is your take on what we've seen over the last 72 hours?
I think to a degree there was an inevitability about this kind of showdown happening. Donald Trump clearly is a man who wants to be on the winning side. And it was interesting that as the Israeli strikes became more and more devastating on Iran and clearly were having a great deal of strategic success, he was associating himself more and more with them. He was talking about, we have now secured air superiority over Iran and Tehran in particular. So I think that was always going to happen. And I think Israel had quite cleverly essentially set the Americans up so they could achieve a great deal with a limited objective. You know, Israel was effectively saying to America, look, there are these 3 plants which we can't get out because we don't have the ordnance. You're the only people who have the bombs big enough, but we've suppressed all the air defenses, we've cleared the skies for you. Come in, do this, clear out, and we can deal with the rest, was, I think, essentially their message. And I think they've been successful at that. But I think one of the really worrying things is that there's being set up this counter-narrative that there was a sustainable status quo before this. There wasn't. Iran is a rogue state. It's utterly inimical to Western interests. It wants to destroy Israel. Its permanent enemy is the United States, which it refers to as the Great Satan. That's been the case, as General Tripp was saying, since 1979. We were not on good terms with somebody with whom we've now fallen out. Yeah. And the Iranian regime wanted nuclear weapons, and you don't have to be a genius to work out why it wanted them. It wanted them to menace and potentially destroy Israel. So something had to give, and this has given. And I think we'll wait to see what happens. But Iran is in a very, very weak position at the moment.
In terms of ultimately, I mean, clearly the West would like to see, the regime revert to what it once could have been. And, the Ayatollah walks the plank, either literally or metaphorically. And there was a point, it seemed, that the Iranian people would have quietly been in favour of that. None of them would have said it too out loudly in Tehran High Street, to be fair, but nonetheless, that was a view. But of course, once the might of the Western military regimes, in particular America, get involved, then sometimes that loyalty just kind of flip again, doesn't it? So yes, we don't, this man, we would rather someone else was running our own country, but now the Americans have bombed us, we're kind of with him in a curious way. So that geopolitical game, it's not quite straightforward.
It's not straightforward, but I think at the moment what we're not doing is creating an Iraq in 2003 situation where we put substantial numbers of Western allied troops on the ground in Iran. I mean, that's not a serious proposition as far as I'm aware at the moment. So I think the Iranians are very proud and nationalistic people. Clearly, they've been suffering under the most brutal dictatorship for 36 years, one which has blood all the way up to the shoulders, and is an appalling regime, and I'm sure they want rid of it. I think there will be a little bit of prickliness that innocent Iranian civilians clearly are being killed in these airstrikes. There's no getting around that. There's no way to avoid that if you're going to carry them out. But I think they will still see this as a further weakening of the regime. The regime will probably respond more brutally because that's what declining dictatorships do. You turn up the dial on the brutality because essentially you have nothing to lose. And particularly if you're the kind of radical Islamist dictatorship that Iran has, you have nothing to fear from death either. You welcome death as part of your sort of path to paradise. So I think there will be a brutal response internally to any sort of expressions of rebellion. But I think there is a slight sense of a ticking clock. I don't think really the regime is looking like it has a long-term future, because I don't know where it goes from this. It's got no military power left to it of any great degree. It's financially and economically very unstable, and it now has Israel and potentially the US willing to take it apart systematically, piece by piece, in a military sense. So it is facing potentially the end times, but those end times can drag on for a long time and they can cost a lot of lives on every side.
I said at the beginning of the programme, Elliot, that if you'd gone back 100 years and asked people what the world will look like in 2025, they might well say, well, there won't be any wars in we'd have got through all of that nonsense. People have been getting along. There won't be much disease, and the idea that people would go into battle will be a thing of the past. And of course, here we are in the 21st century, in the year 2025, and there's wars all over the place. And there might even be more on the horizon. We're talking about increasing defence spending of certainly all NATO members over the coming years. Perhaps not the direction of travel that our forefathers thought we would be taking, but here we are. Nonetheless, there is a group of people out there, whether they are sort of Palestinian protesters or whether they're this group that's just being prescribed Palestinian Action, that sort of see us as the bad guys. And that trio of countries, in particular America, Israel and the UK, so we're the bad guys, and all the other places, including Iran, are the good guys. Well, what do you make of that thinking?
I find it utterly baffling. If you think one can have all the sympathy in the world with the innocent Palestinian civilians who've been killed in such numbers and who've been, destined to a life of being refugees for decades.
Yeah.
But Palestine Action are very clear. If you look at their website, they are about the destruction of, they're about thwarting and destroying the state of Israel. They're on board with what Iran wants to do. They're on board with what Hamas wants to do. These are genocidal groups and nations which see the only solution to the crisis in the Middle East as wiping Israel off the face of the map. And, you know, as far as Israel is concerned, wiping Jews off the face of the map is not something that is unfamiliar. We've heard this kind of thing before. So I think the idea that you can be some kind of progressive because you oppose American intervention and American interests, it boils down to essentially a very kind of Jeremy Corbyn-esque view of the world. If America does it, it must prima facie be wrong. Therefore, we'll move on from that to construct some kind of vaguely leftist argument in favour of it. But I think it's warped morally beyond belief.
Yes, it's quite curious to hear people say this stuff. You know, when you look at clips on social media of what people are willing to say in public and arguably believe it themselves. But, you know, we live in a world of democracy. I suppose people can have all sorts of wacky views. If this wasn't so dangerous, maybe it would be quite funny. And in terms of what Yvette Cooper has just done, prescribing this particular group, Palestinian Action, just give us a word, if you would. You know more than most on parliamentary protocol and the like. I don't know whether your area of expertise drips into this region, but when a Home Secretary prescribes a group, does that mean they're prescribed as a terrorist group? Because prescribed, quite literally, doesn't necessarily mean that. It could just be a banned group for other reasons.
Well, she's using powers under the Terrorism Act 2000. So, yes, I mean, the reason that Palestine Action will be proscribed as a group and that support for it will be illegal is because they're considered a terrorist or terrorist supporting group under the original 2000 legislation. And so they'll join, Hamas and Hizb ut-Tahrir and groups like that. And I think that's entirely fair. I mean, I think the actions that we saw last week of, breaking into an RAF facility and damaging warplanes goes beyond normal protest, goes beyond acceptable protest, because they don't know what those warplanes are for. They think they do, but they don't, because they're, they don't really mind about being ill-informed. They've taken their own views. But it's not for them to determine what military capabilities are used for where. They've taken a unilateral decision to impair the British Armed Forces. And I think once you do that, you're no longer a protester. You're an enemy of the country.
There it is. Elliot, thank you as ever. Great to have you on again as well. Elliot Wilson, writer. He's also a former House of Commons clerk. You know, the fellas that sit there just below the Speaker. There ain't nothing that guy doesn't know about parliamentary procedure and all the implications of it. Thank you to him. Thank you to Chip Chapman as well. Over to you. In terms of today and where we're at after the weekend, what do you make of Donald Trump making the world a safer place? I would certainly tick that box and say I think he has. But it's work, man alive, this is work in progress, right? 0344 499 1000.
Keir Starmer was actively undermining that strategy. Because Keir Starmer was wandering around saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry. Donald Trump doesn't mean it. It's just noise. It's just the hawks in Washington just beating the drum. It's not really going to happen." So at the same time that Keir Starmer was basically calling for de-escalation, his words had the practical effect of undermining that strategy. And you can't have the British Prime Minister conducting foreign policy in complete ignorance.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So on the back of that breaking news in the last sort of 15 minutes or so, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, saying she's now decided to prescribe Palestinian action and will lay an order before Parliament next week, which, if passed, will make membership and support of the protest group illegal. Now, they are currently having a protest in Trafalgar Square. They've been banned from getting near Parliament. And so far, police have arrested 3 people at that protest. 2 were held for obstruction after protesters tried to stop officers detaining others. And 1 was arrested for racially aggravated offence, which is interesting. This comes from Cliff, who says, "What a weekend. Iran will never be able to match the USA military for military. However, they would not be daft enough to go toe-to-toe with the US. They would use terrorism and guerrilla tactics because that would be difficult to defend against. Expect suicide bombers, vehicles driving at crowds. It's hard to stop an enemy not afraid of dying for their cause." Well, that was, almost word for word what I was thinking too, Cliff. That's what I sense we might get. And maybe there's good reason why Keir Starmer is not putting his name to this at the moment. Paddy is in Sussex on this point. Paddy, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian. Perhaps, and I mean perhaps, we've dodged a bullet. Trump has got previous on making these attacks. Remember how he attacked an airbase in Syria?
Yep.
He sent like 30 cruise missiles at it, but he warned the Russians beforehand. So the Iranians have had plenty of warning of this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I've heard that they've moved all their enriched uranium out of the tunnels and the equipment, and their country is vast, the size of Western Europe.
100%.
So their enriched uranium could be absolutely anywhere, including a shed near you. And, of course, they've got the knowledge now. So they've promised they're going to do all this in secret now. So you're not confident that America hit the target, as it were? Well, I mean, even the bombs did hit the target.
Yeah.
It's a bit like Cheyenne Mountain in America. That was the NORAD headquarters under, like, I don't know, a couple of thousand feet of granite.
Sure.
They stopped doing that. Yeah. They moved their establishment all over the country. That's why the internet was invented. So we're in a way we're in a worse position with Iran because that uranium could be anywhere now. The equipment could be anywhere. They can make as much of the equipment as they want. And they've sworn it's all going to be in secret now. Yeah. So my proposal, and I've heard this on the internet a lot, why don't we just say to Israel and Iran, both you give it up, even? Who would have to... but I mean, would either of those countries, if you look at how entrenched they both are, regardless of who's right and wrong, I think we all know who's right, but would they do that? Would they just simply go, OK, everything stops now? I don't know who's right, because earlier you mentioned about a death cult. Well, we've installed the death cult in Syria. The death cult in Syria, who we've installed under Operation Timber Sycamore. There was a pretty brutal death cult there before, of course. Well, the guy we've got in place now, the guy we're giving all the tax, not all the tax, but everyone listening to the show, their tax money, some of the tax money is going to the ISIS leader, the guy who burned the Yazidi women alive, countless beheadings and all sorts of torture. It was him. him.
It's a horrendous... No, I get it. It's a horrendous regime. Listen, Paddy, I've got to move on because no other reason I want to get more voices on before the news. Thank you. Let's talk to Chris in Bournemouth. Chris, what are you thinking on this? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Keir Starmer will be living in Clark Cuckoo land if he don't think that Iran has already got people here ready and willing to do what they have to do to satisfy the Iranian regime.
Even if we're not putting our name to this, do you think that will count for nothing because we are putting our name to some extent to the Israel position?
Yes, because basically, Ian, we haven't done it for years and years and years. We run alongside the Americans and they think we are both in the same boat. These people have been coming into this country for years on dinghies from Calais with no paperwork or anything like that.
When the whole boat... Do you know what? When the boat thing first started to happen, the biggest proportion of people on those boats were Iranians. It was almost, as I understand it, almost exclusively Iranian on those boats for the first bunch of months, possibly the first year this was happening.
Exactly.
Although I think many claimed they were trying to leg it from Iran because the place was a hellhole. We will see. Chris, I get your words. Thank you. 0344 499 1000. We'll have more comment from you on the way. Brad says, Brad's in Cambridge, so Starmer and Lammy are sitting on the fence and pleasing neither side. What a surprise from this spineless regime with absolutely no commitment to anything. France and the rest of Europe, France, our allies, Germany, Spain, are they in similar positions on this one? Let America kind of go it alone? Tacit support, but not overt. Has Donald Trump made the world a safer place after those attacks on Iran? 0344 499 1000. We'll have more calls from you on the other side of the news. Let's get the latest news headlines here on Talk at 2 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, welcome back. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. It is the home of Common Sense. On the programme, Iran has warned the United States to expect heavy consequences for those strikes at the weekend on its nuclear sites, threatening that American involvement in the conflict with Israel will expand the scope of legitimate targets. The words of the Ayatollah. We'll have more on that. We're asking the question, has Donald Trump made the world a safer place? Curiously enough, is it a safer place as a result? We'll have more on that in a few moments. Also, Palestine Action. The group will be prescribed as a terror organisation, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said, as 3 members have been arrested by police at a protest taking place right now in Trafalgar Square. These were the people that broke into Bryce Norton just last week. And Brits could be slapped with higher fares just to get to hospital under a new taxi tax that could be coming in. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news, right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. This from Rob in Cheshire, who says, afternoon, Ian, with regards to the Bryce Norton incident, you're correct. It is an act of terrorism and countermount to treason. Entering Crown MOD property illegally. I served 23 years in the RAF and many gate guard duties. The terrorists that entered the base illegally are very lucky they were not shot dead, as in my day we would have had the right to fire under these conditions. Committing or about to commit an act of terrorism. I don't know what has changed. Ban those Palestinian terrorists and put them away and throw away the key. They hate the UK and yet they live here. I'm scared, Ian, says Rob. Yeah, I feel a little bit like that. You look around and you think, you know, we've got a paedophile that can't be deported, even though he should have been deported. You've got people breaking in. Goodness, I mean, the world is kind of... I mean, where's Rupert Lowe's gamekeeper when you need him, for God's sake? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Alan Tolhurst, chief reporter at Politics Home, is with us. Afternoon to you, Alan.
Afternoon, Ian.
Always good to have you with us. Iran issuing warnings to Trump, of course, calling him a gambler. Iran's defence ministry has warned of a decisive response following that bunker buster strike. Multiple strikes. I mean, this was, you know, I don't want to use the phrase the mother of all strikes, but it was kind of in that territory. There was a lot of military power that was deployed here. Of course, Iran can't match the US in that respect, but they do have other tactics up their sleeve, one would assume.
Yeah, and I think that's why your question about whether it's made it a kind of safer world as a result is an interesting one, because I think perhaps in the long term, if this has disabled Iran's ability to build a nuclear weapon, perhaps not forever, but certainly for a foreseeable future, I think obviously it has made it a safer place. But in the short term, the kind of response and retaliation we may see from Iran in various kind of formats, whether that's kind of, you know, terror attacks, whether that's strikes on other countries, on Israel, obviously I think that has made it a kind of a less safe place. But it's that kind of trade-off I think that the White House has gone, and that's the, talk about being a gambler, that's the risk that Donald Trump has taken in going to do this action kind of unilaterally.
Yeah, and in terms of where it goes next, I mean, is this a wait-and-see response? I mean, one would assume Iran aren't just going to sit there, you know, biting their fingernails for the next several months. Something's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think you're hearing from people allied to Tehran saying that literally they have to, because essentially if this attack by the US goes sort of unpunished or unresponded to, then that shows that you can continue to do these kind of strikes with impunity, and that's not something that Tehran would want to project. So I think that we will see some sort of response. How quickly that comes through and what form it takes, I think, yeah, we're not to know at the moment. But yeah, clearly that kind of calls for de-escalation, I think, will probably fall on deaf ears, because it's unlikely that Tehran are going to let this pass without some sort of retaliation.
Many people are pointing out this afternoon in this respect that what we have at the moment, Alan, is likely to be, you know, perhaps isolated terror attacks. People are talking about, you know, cars being driven into crowds and suicide bombers. I mean, it's not... you couldn't rule that kind of response out, I guess.
No, and there's been some reports in the American press about sort of activation of sleeper cells and that sort of thing in response. You know, how true all that kind of stuff is, how likely they are to come to fruition. Obviously, we'll yet to know. It's unlikely to be sort of, you know, sort of all-out war at this point, but there will certainly be some sort of form. They'll want to, you know, claim some sort of response against what happened, and like I said, what form that takes, we're yet to see. It will be revealed, I would imagine, in the coming days and weeks.
Indeed, and this sort of chimes with Yvette Cooper this afternoon prescribing Palestine Action as a terror group now. It takes some time to implement this fully, which means, bizarrely, they're actually having a protest as we speak in Trafalgar Square, which this time next week would be completely illegal. Right now, it isn't. Although this is sort of about Palestine, if you read the doctrines and the details, they are kind of widely across, I think, the whole Middle Eastern view, and I don't imagine they would be siding with America on what happened at the weekend.
No, it's interesting as well, because you talk about this, the protest taking place as being sort of a Palestine Action protest, but the fact is that the pro-Palestine movement is much broader than just Palestine Action. They are, you know, a very small group that have undertaken, you know, which has not been covered hugely. The Times, actually, the Sunday Times have done lots of coverage actually in recent months. Actually, there's been this long campaign of them attacking kind of defense companies and defense sites. It obviously culminated with the very high-profile attack on Bryce Norton at the weekend, and that's the reason why Palestine Action are being prescribed as a terrorist group in the way that sort of things like Hamas and Hezbollah and right-wing terror groups are. But actually, I think that the pro-Palestine movement, I think, is quite annoyed about this, because essentially it's going to mean that if any, you know, single person from Palestine Action is at a pro-Palestine event, you know, a protest or a demonstration, that's obviously going to mean that there's legal implications for that, and it's going to clamp down on kind of what is, you know, largely very peaceful protests, but obviously this element of it are going to create much more kind of legalistic problem for them, because obviously, yeah, just being a member of a prescribed terrorist is going to become a legal offence in itself.
I mean, there's some interesting. There's a little bit of where sort of right wing meets left wing on this, in terms of banning groups or prescribing them as terrorist organisations. And I did this morning. I was thinking about it, and you know, I'm always uncomfortable with governments simply, you know, an individual or a set of individuals in government going, yeah, we don't like what they're saying, so we're going to make them a terrorist group. I think that's you have to be really careful who you aim that at. I am painfully aware of what they did at Bryce Norton, you know, could have been so much worse, and it was on, you know, a military base that it happened. They did impede the capabilities of military planes, huge security breach from the Bryce Norton people, but I'm sure that's a subject to an uncomfortable investigation. So initially I was thinking, well, I don't know whether banning, you know, it's a tiny group, and there will always be people who have these views. But now I'm sort of thinking, now Yvette Cooper said it out loud, maybe it was the right thing to do. And I don't come at this with any sympathy for, clearly, for Palestine Action. More a question mark on what I want my government to be able to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you've got to separate, I think, the ideas of kind of the freedom of speech, the freedom to say the things that you want to say, even if they are seen as uncomfortable, and kind of actions which are criminal and terrorist in nature. As I said, members of Palestine Action have undertaken a long campaign ever since, you know, even before kind of October the 7th, of attacking defence firms and defence capabilities in the UK, which they think are involved in helping or providing Israel with arms. That stuff is obviously very separate to people, you know, walking up and down the streets, you know, saying freedom to Palestine. And I think it's separating those two things out. And I think because this group are called Palestine Action and they're doing things, as you say, broadly, because they are pro-Palestinian, I think that it's going to be a tricky situation. It's unlike perhaps some other terrorist groups where there's a clear delineation between, you know, kind of the what people say, and which might be kind of hate speech, and obviously their actions, which are terrorist in nature.
Well, these people were often talked about as being the kind of just stop oil of the Middle East, in that sense, that their trademarks seem to be graffitiing stuff and spraying red paint all over the place, which is why perhaps in my mind I hadn't elevated them to, you know, quite the level of ISIS or something.
Right, yeah, sure. And I think you're right. When it comes to that kind of stuff, just, you know, graffiti and kind of, you know, being a nuisance, essentially, you shouldn't necessarily be labelled a terrorist for causing a nuisance, however annoying or futile you perhaps think the campaign is. But the fact is, I think that they've caused, you know, running into the millions in terms of the cost to the damage. That they've done. And I think in that instance, I think after what happened with Bryce Norton, I think it was unlikely that the Home Secretary was not going to take some sort of action, I think, this week.
Yeah, and you don't, you know, replace a military jet engine for, 500 quid. So, as you rightly say, that thing's out of action for a while. Interesting story coming from Reform UK. Nigel Farage made this announcement. He plans to reinstate non-dom status. The idea is if you are, one of those rich characters where you do pay your taxes, you just don't pay your taxes on stuff you earn outside the UK. So the new idea is to have a non-dom status. You pay 250,000 quid to come and, function and live in this country. And with the money that's raised, Mr Farage will give it back to the poor. Not quite the poor, but anyone earning less than, I think, 23,000 a year or something will get 600 quid each as a result of that. All sounds kind of, I mean, it's a bit clunky, to be honest, but the sentiment sounds quite interesting. There's 600 quid, and we've got it from, rich old duffers who are coming in. So we're not losing them, so they're still valuable to us, but we're just making them pay, and we're passing it on, not to the government, but to individuals. However, some of the number crunchers, it takes no time at all, does it, have been out in force having a look at this, and they reckon, all well and good, but it could cost the economy £34 billion.
Yeah, Dan Needle of Tax Policy Associates, he reckons that if you look at kind of the OBR figures, it would 34 billion over 5 years. So not necessarily that useful to the Exchequer. Obviously, Reform would say, well, actually, the Exchequer wouldn't get that money because people are high net worth individuals are looking to leave the UK and would do so over the next few years. I think actually the Adam Smith Institute looks, there are something like 3 million millionaires in this country at the moment, and I think that would go down to something like 2.5 million in the next 4 years. That's what they're predicting. So I think that's why this sort of thing would be brought in. I think it's a cheeky kind of policy because it kind of tweaks at Labour in terms of their attacking non-doms, but it's also this kind of Robin Hood aspect to it as well. I think it's it's kind of good mischief making from an opposition party that even if those figures don't necessarily add up, they look like the ones sort of on attack on offense, and it's the other side who are sort of on defense going, oh well, actually it's not gonna work so much. I think that's kind of a position where I think Nigel Farage and Reform would like to be in general. I think
it's interesting that the 3 million millionaires, I read that stat as well. I thought, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that number, 3 million millionaires. But I mean, wouldn't we be about, if we had 6 million millionaires, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Surely the more millionaires the better, until the point we're all millionaires.
Although there is that phrase, that left-wing phrase, that every billionaire is a policy failure. But so I think it's interesting. I think it's how we kind of look at how we kind of process that, and I think that's why often you've got to take some of those stories about millionaires leaving with a bit of a pinch of salt. Often it's like, oh, several hundred millionaires, or maybe even 1,000 millionaires have left because of whatever policy that they're deemed to be. Obviously, that is a very, very small number, and obviously a lot of those kind of that money, that how we term millionaires, those kind of classic terminology for it, refers mainly to money and assets. So a lot of that is to do with tied up in property and investments that aren't really sort of readily accessible. It's not as though just people are able to sort of splash the cash. So it's different. And obviously, I think if you were to increase the number of millionaires, that would largely come as an increase in kind of housing prices and house costs, and that's not necessarily something we want to see in general. So what
about? I'm picking your brains unfairly here, Alan. Do you know how many billionaires we have? Because I don't.
I do not know. That's a much better question, actually. And I think that's actually where the real thing is, because when we talk about high value individuals, we talk about millionaires. I think that actually does a disservice to what we're talking about here in terms of the billionaires, which is way higher and a much smaller amount. And actually, Dan Needle from Tax Policy Associates was saying that a large part of this policy, this Britannia card, would give a large tax break to those billionaires who are already in the UK. I think that would not necessarily be as useful as it might once seem. So I think the number of billionaires is probably the more interesting question, I think.
I've just been told how many there are, by the way. Apparently 156. So it's 3 million millionaires, but 156 billionaires. Somebody was saying yesterday there's different ways this stat can be dressed up. I'm sure you've heard it, Alan, but in distant terms, becoming a millionaire is like driving from London to Paris. Becoming a billionaire is like driving from London to Saturn. That's the difference. It's so seismic. It couldn't be. It's not in similar territory.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think you're right. Like, if there's some of the visual representations where it's like you see a tiny bit, that's a million, and then the billion is takes up the entire sort of page. It's orders of magnitude. So I think we do need to separate it out when we talk about millionaires and billionaires. I think has to be that different definition, and that number, as you say, 3 million millionaires to 156 billionaires is so stark. It kind of shows you what we're talking about here.
I am assuming you are still part of the 156, Alan. That's how I. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, with all these talkTV gigs, so I can't not be, can I?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that computer company you sold to Steve Jobs back in the day did really well. So listen, Alan, great to have you on with us as ever. Alan Tolhurst, he is chief reporter at Politics Home. Thank you to him. More comments coming in. Paul Barnes in Cornwall, who's ex-police and ex-British Army veteran, says, Ian, the attack on RAF Bryce Norton, this group, Palestine Action, is now considered to be a terrorist group, a terrorist organisation supporting Iran and supported by Iran. This is clearly a terrorist act on RAF craft, on an RAF station here on UK mainland. No matter which way you look at it, it's an attack by a proxy terrorist organisation of Iran. So in my book, they have thrown the first stone at the UK. OK, this time it was paint. What next? A bomb. As a former member of the British Army concerned with airfield and other MOD establishments as live armed security, next time this happens, and it will, someone is going to get shot. Then I suppose they will hang the soldier, sailor or airman who pulled the trigger out to dry. Well, that seems to be the way, doesn't it? There'll be a massive, we saw what happened to some of our brave personnel in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and I know it was tricky and uncomfortable and political. I get all of that, but, and this is going on to this day, and Paul is absolutely bang on. You can almost see it. Oh, look, he's been arrested. You see it to police officers. Pull the trigger once in a blue moon, and when they do, all hell breaks loose, and someone wants to do them for murder. But yeah, you will see something like that pan out. So there it is. They are a prescribed terror group now, Palestine Action. They are allowed today to have their little protest in Trafalgar Square because I think the legislation doesn't kick in for about a week. Over to you on all of this. We haven't talked about Rupert Lowe's dog, have we really? Rupert Lowe, of course, former Reform UK. I mean, the story is interesting to me for this reason. Got his gamekeeper. Who has a gamekeeper? Man alive. Rupert Lowe's worth a few quid and good luck to him. Fabulous stuff. But he got his gamekeeper to shoot dead his dog because the dog was ill. Now, the defence of this is that actually in the country, farmers, not always, but, it's a country thing. Your dog is crippled, it can't walk anymore, it's old, it's got all sorts of other disorders. Then the farmer, or in this case the gamekeeper, I'll use the nice phrase, dispatches the dog. It's how country people roll. They don't go to the vets, book an appointment at the local RSPCA and have the dog put down. They just do that. Do you have a problem with that? Because when I first heard it, I thought, well, it's a bit grim, isn't it? I mean, I think personally, if I had a pet dog, I wouldn't want my pet dog, even if it was as quick, possibly even quicker than an injection. I don't know if I want the memory of my dog being that. But then, maybe if you've got a country set mind, that's how you kind of frame it. I don't know. What do you make of that? Shooting your dog dead. Even if it's about to die anyway, within, a week or two. 0344 499 1000. More comment coming in from you. We'll do that next on Talk.
this was the logical and necessary conclusion of the path that the Islamic Republic of Iran refused to abandon. America and Israel have been trying for years to take different paths. You know, people have mocked Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, for constantly saying that Israel would have to strike in Iran for so many years. The US, Israel, they offered negotiations, they've extended time, they've warned, they've given the regime in Tehran every opportunity to reverse course, to step back from its genocidal ambitions.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
Steve in East Yorkshire says the Palestine Action idiots who attacked military aircraft surely acted on behalf of or as representatives of the Palestinian Action organisation. So that organisation should be held responsible and its leaders or organisers should be arrested, put on trial for terrorism offences and also the bill for the £25 million worth of criminal damage their organisation and members have caused, says Steve. So the Palestine Action... military acted on behalf or of representatives of the Palestine Action organisation. Yeah, they did, obviously. That's who they were. They would claim not to be a terror group, but a protest group. And I know it's fine lines, and I was musing the idea this morning, and I said it at the beginning of the programme, and a couple of you contacted me and said, I can't believe you'd think they're not a terrorist group. Well, I wasn't unequivocal. I'm clearly coming round to this. But my point was about the power you give governments, and particularly this government, even if you loathe or hate the cause or the reasoning. You know, governments banning things is something you need to treat really, really carefully. But simultaneously, we often want governments to spring into action really quickly. I would like them to deport the Rochdale paedophile as quick as they have made this group a terror organisation. I don't think that's too much to ask. I've had a lot of... I mentioned the Peter Cardwell interview with Keir Starmer last week, which I thought was fabulous, by the way. And Peter did a lot of hard work, as you have to get a Prime Minister in situ. I don't think I might come back to this later. There's not time really to go into the detail, but I've never seen an interview cause so much controversy in terms of the conspiracy theory of where Keir Starmer was and whose house he was in when Peter did the interview. I mean, you've never seen so much nonsense on social media, of which I've seen over the weekend Peter brilliantly batting it back and just stating some truths. But that doesn't stop the weird online world we now live in. What a funny old place we've arrived in. And then we say, should kids have social media? You shouldn't have social media till you're about 87, frankly. Let's go to Georgina down in London. Georgina, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Well, can I just say that I saw Peter Cardwell do his interview and I thought he was wonderful. But Keir Starmer, look into his eyes. The wheel is spinning, but the hamster is most definitely dead. Anyway,
I like that. The wheel is spinning, but the hamster is dead.
I rang about Donald Trump. I applaud President Trump for standing with Israel and for standing with the American Air Force to bomb the Iranian bases. Iran isn't just a threat to Israel, Ian. It's a real and present danger to the whole of the Western world, and people need to remember that. Remember, you're talking about a horrific regime that will have a woman's eyes gouged out if they don't wear a veil. Yep. So Donald Trump isn't only helping Israel here, but he's helping the whole of the Western world, and he's also helping to free the normal Iranian people who hate this radical fundamentalist regime. The British government should be showing camaraderie with Israel and thanking Donald Trump publicly for his intervention instead of dodging questions like David Lammy did. It's absolutely disgraceful when he was asked about the USA's bombing of Iranian bases and he wouldn't pick a side. Yeah. Our government cannot be all things to all men, especially where war's concerned. They cannot sit on the fence. You can't negotiate with Iranian fanatical fundamentalism. They need to pick their side, have the courage of their convictions and stick with it. They need to find a testicular fortitude. But as always with Starmer's government, as I said before, the wheel is spinning, but the hamster is dead. They don't want to choose. You know, they need to get on with the job in hand. The people of Israel and the normal people of Iran have been living in fear for decades, Ian. It's not fear that stops death. It's fear that stops people from living, and it must be stopped.
It must be stopped indeed. Georgina, always very forthright stuff. It's really quite simple. There's a death cult, a terrorist country that is causing havoc across the Middle East, particularly at Israel. No, that doesn't mean, by the way, that you don't have any criticisms of Israel. You can wear two hats on these things. But, Israel is surrounded by terrorism. That's how it spent its entire existence. There is no doubt that Iran is not the side to be on, if that's the way you have to phrase the question. I mean, it really is not. That is not the right side of history. Jill's in Cornwall. What have you got for us, Jill? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Well, I'm just irritated with these Palestinian marches, if I'm honest with you. I mean, well, for a start, why do they have to cover their faces up if they are genuine in, just marching to sort of show their that it just seems to be that we seem to go down a route where we will accept some things and not others. We've put some female in prison because she happened to put something on the internet we didn't like, and yet we've got these people marching through London, causing problems, climbing statues, painting all over the place, and now it's getting more and more difficult to...
Well, we're becoming, in a way, sort of victims of our own liberal success. So it's great to say we all believe in freedom of speech, even if we don't like freedom of speech. But then when it gets really uncomfortable, we think, hang on a second, does that cross the line of freedom of speech?
Well, there's freedom of speech, and then there is you say what we want you to say, or not at all. And I'm afraid that we've got a situation now where it's all right to supposedly accept the Palestinians and their marching and everything else, and yet they criticise the Israelis. And I'm sorry, but if they really, really were upset with what was happening in Palestine, why aren't they protesting over there?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I just feel that we have a situation where we tolerate some and not others, and that looks as if we support the Palestinians and what they're saying and what's happening and everything else, and the Israelis are the problem, and I don't view it that way.
There it is, Jill. Great call. Thank you very much indeed. Becca says, who appears to be talking to the wrong person, says, get out of your London bubble. This is reference Rupert Lowe's gamekeeper shooting his dog because it was dying, basically. Get out of your London bubble. If an animal is suffering, then put it out of its misery. May upset you little snowflakes, but we still whack bunnies with Mixie over the head with the heaviest thing available. Yeah, I mean, I'm not in London, so I'm not in a London bubble. Grew up in the biggest farming area of the United Kingdom, so I'm more than familiar with all of that. But I don't think that was really the point. I understand there is a country thing here. Not all farmers, as few been in touch, would never in a million years want to shoot their own dog. Not because it may well be the kindest thing. But I think some don't want to consider that their lifelong companion ended its days with its head blown off. I think that's perhaps the deal for some. But yeah, if you get into country life and having grown up in an area where there's an awful lot of country people farming, goodness knows what else, yeah, I mean, on that one point, Becca is absolutely spot on. That if an animal in its misery, it's exactly what you would do. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. Our lines are open. More from you coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. We'll be back with more from you in a few moments. 25 to 3. Now, Brits could face higher fares for essential journeys under a proposed taxi tax. Campaigners warn a 20% VAT hike on minicabs could price many out of vital trips, including trips to the hospital and cost the NHS millions annually. Disability advocates argue those services are essential for those unable to rely on public transport. In a moment, Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Driver Association. But first, Martina Bett, political correspondent at The Sun, who wrote on this very story today. Martina, good to have you with us again. So tell us more. What's going on here? Who's lobbing VAT on taxi journeys? What did the situation used to look like, and what is the proposed future?
Well, there's a reason why so many people from charities to big businesses are kicking off about it. And that's because the government, as you mentioned, is looking at slapping a 20% VAT on all minicabs and private hire journeys. That's Bolt, Uber. And the reason for that is because there was a legal ruling which said that most drivers, they would usually be exempt because they were self-employed and didn't meet the £90,000 threshold to charge VAT, which is what kept the fares down. But the High Court ruling said that systems change, and it's the taxi companies, not the drivers, providing the service. So they could basically be forced to add VAT to every fare. And, this is where the problem really starts, because campaigners say that the price of everyday journeys will shoot up. And, the campaigners say it's the most vulnerable people who will be hit the hardest. And, in the story we've got today in The Sun, we're talking about disabled people or those with mobility problems that, use minicabs not as a, luxurious service, but to get to hospital appointments, to the doctor, to go and see family. And also the NHS could be in the firing line, because the health service, I think, spends already something like 400 million a year getting patients to non-emergency appointments, and a lot of that is done through private cabs. So, if fares jump by 20%, the NHS bill goes up.
Yeah, I mean, it really is as simple as that. And, I often make this point. When we talk about public transport, people don't tend to include taxis in that, but they very much are in that. And as you rightly say, it isn't just individuals that use it, institutions like the NHS. Schools, kids who've got specific needs may require taxi journeys to school. There are thousands, tens of thousands of kids that go to school via a taxi. So this is going to be costly all round.
Absolutely. And also, it's not just charities that are sounding the alarm. There's also big businesses groups like the Federation of Small Business. There was an article a few months ago saying that this tax could basically degrade the high street, harm the pubs, shops and restaurants, and actually force 25,000 drivers off the road. At a time where there's lots of firms that are facing already pretty, toxic cocktail of rising costs.
Yeah, spot on. Listen, great to have you with us again, Martina. Thank you very much indeed for that. That is Martina Bett, political correspondent over there at The Sun. Let's go to work with our friend Steve McNamara, General Secretary at the Licensed Taxi Driver Association. Steve, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. As if your industry hasn't been through enough hurdles and hoops over the last few years. Man alive, it's never ending for you guys. I mean, you've got broad shoulders over there at the LTDA. I know that. You can weather a storm, but this would be significant.
No, the irony is it's not a taxi tax. And all the videos that you saw there and the pictures that the Sun show and the highlights, they are all in fact taxis, and they are not liable to any taxi tax. This is a VAT issue that arose primarily with Uber. Martina was partly right with her legal definition of it, but what happened is the workers, the drivers at Uber insisted that they were workers, they weren't self-employed. They dragged Uber through every court in the country. Eventually, they wound up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you're absolutely right, you are workers, you are not self-employed, because they work primarily for Uber. And that would have been the end of it. Uber would have been liable to the national insurance, and they would have been liable to holiday pay and all the bits and pieces that go with employment. And that would have been the end of the matter. But for some reason that nobody yet quite understands, and there's God knows how many conspiracy theories doing the rounds, Uber then decided to go to the High Court and what's called a Part 8 hearing. So what it is, if the law is a bit vague or you're not sure on it, you can apply to the court for this Part 8 hearing. And they went to the High Court in London, and it was a London ruling, by the way. The workers' rights was London only. And they went to the High Court and they said, look, the Supreme Court says that they're workers, and if they're workers, then we're taking the bookings and we've got to charge VAT. Now, everybody knew what the answer would be because the High Court is not going to challenge the Supreme Court. So the High Court says, you're absolutely right. They're workers, they're working for you, you've got to charge VAT. And again, that would have been the end of the matter because it was only related to London. But again, for reasons nobody understands, Uber then did a similar Part 8 hearing for the rest of the country because there's different licensing laws. And again, the ruling was that they are workers and therefore you should be liable for VAT. So this is not something that the government have cooked up. It's not like Keir Starmer and the boys are sitting around thinking, I know what we'll do, we'll create a new tax. That is not what. Because
they do like doing that, of course, as we fully know, Steve.
But that's in this instance, they're definitely not guilty, right? We can't point any finger of blame at them on this one. But the bit I really don't understand is if you're a taxi driver in many parts of the country, you're self-employed, you are not liable for VAT until you hit a VAT threshold. Yeah. If you're a small taxi booking firm, depending on how much money you turn over, it's up to you to register for VAT or not. And then, even then, as a taxi company, many of your drivers would be self-employed, just subcontracting to you at different times. They wouldn't be liable for VAT. Yeah. This is purely and utterly been brought about where the legislation over the years, look, we all know what used to happen. There used to be a small minicab office in every town, in every station, from across the country. They've all gone. It's all now run by big corporates, the big multi-million-pound companies, and the world has changed, and they take the bookings. So what I don't understand is I'm having a lot of work done on my house at the moment. My plumber hasn't said to me, oh, Steve, you've got to pay the plumber tax. It's VAT. I just pay the VAT because I know that that's how it works. If I have a fence put up in the garden and the guy comes around, he doesn't call it the fence tax. I just pay the VAT. It's not tax. It was brought about by these big operating companies deliberately seeking this ruling, which we all knew what was going to happen. And I'm not going to baffle you with the various conspiracy theories as to why they did it, but they did do it. And as a result, we've now got this ruling, and they're trying to appeal the ruling. Yeah. But not the original people who did it are not appealing it. Uber are not appealing it. It's now other firms appealing it. It's really complicated. But the bottom line of the day is it's a great soundbite. It's not a taxi tax. And
doesn't affect London black cab drivers unless they're VAT registered.
No, it does not impact us at all. One of the issues that we have is VAT. The threshold for VAT is only £85,000 now, and to drive a taxi, you're buying a vehicle with finance, £100,000. It's very easy to creep into VAT. That's something the government could do. The VAT threshold hasn't been raised for many, many years, and it should be.
There it is, Steve. Always good to get your views. Thank you, Steve McNamara, General Secretary at the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Over to you on that one, 0344 499 1000. More comment coming in on what's been happening over the course of the weekend. It was a fairly quiet weekend, wasn't it, other than a substantial bombing in Iran. This comes from Barry, who says, afternoon, I did lengthy RAF service, and as I remember, you only had the right to open fire if someone was shooting at you. It's a wake-up call, literally, for the RAF. Airfield security was always poor at best, too complacent and lax. This is reference what happened, of course, at Bryce Norton last week, because that kind of factors in to all of this as well. In terms of how we divvy up loyalties and, where we show our allegiances, there are curious people out there, and, Palestine Action, which is one group. They're a terrorist group, by the way. I think I can say that now, because they've just been prescribed as one. Those kind of organisations, and there was a sort of pro-Palestinian, largely anti-Israel march again at the weekend. People holding banners up saying, we're with Iran and freedom for Iran. But, I mean, this is a terrorist dictatorship, and it's a death cult, basically. People holding up banners in this country. Your average Brit, well, not your average Brit, your wayward Brit, holding up banners saying, be on the right side of history, with a picture of the Ayatollah on it. Matt's in Cheshire. Matt, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. Can I say great calls from your other callers before?
Yeah.
I think it was Georgina and Jill, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Very, very passionate and sort of top quality.
Yep.
For me, this isn't an attack on Iran. Pardon the pun, but Iran is the Mecca of Islamism. And this is
Saudi Arabia is strictly the Mecca of Islamism, isn't it?
It's the Mecca of Islam.
You're talking about politicized Islamism.
Yeah,
Apologies.
Islamism and the terrorist arm of Islamism.
Yeah.
So what we've seen in a week is the left's world completely shattered. Israel basically bringing the big bad boy of the Middle East to its knees in about 3 days. We've not heard anything from the left about, oh my God, Israel are actually hard as nails and I can't believe what they've done. So they're obviously, their worldview is now falling apart. And Trump is basically fighting back for the West, saying, listen, we could destroy all this in a week or two.
Sure.
And everything you believe in and everything that you fight for and protest for and walk around with your silly masks on, we could destroy it all. Yeah. And you're all part of it. And all you are is useful idiots for these people who are going to destroy. So all I see it as is a little gesture. Trump can sit back now and see what they do. I'm pretty sure nothing else will happen now. Yeah. And the Iranian people will at last be free. And can I say one thing, Ian, as well? If we replaced a lot of Iranian Muslims with some of the Muslims in Britain that don't deserve to be here, I think we'd have a more decent, civil and intelligent society.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. And, you know, it's no secret that the huge swathes of people in Iran would rather be living under a different regime than the one they currently are. But that said, you know, support and loyalty do strange things at different times. And when America starts dropping bombs on Iran, that loyalty might revert back to, even if it's not their ideal flavour of leadership, it might revert back. We'll watch with interest. Matt, thank you as ever. 0344 499 1000.
Keir Starmer was actively undermining that strategy. Because Keir Starmer was wandering around saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry. Donald Trump doesn't mean it. It's just noise. It's just the hawks in Washington just beating the drum. It's not really going to happen." So at the same time that Keir Starmer was basically calling for de-escalation, his words had the practical effect of undermining that strategy. And you can't have the British Prime Minister conducting foreign policy in complete ignorance.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I mean, it's interesting when you look at the kind of protests, and I'm not, obviously, and I think probably the same as most people, not against people protesting just because I disagree with what they're protesting about. I mean, that's, meant to be the right of protest. We can't police the human condition. People will have odd and interesting views that you fundamentally disagree with. You couldn't be more opposed to it if you tried, but you kind of respect their right to advocate that view and shout from the rooftops about that view, so long as they're not getting on your wick too much or inconveniencing you in doing so. But there are certain areas, and like the kind of anti-Israel protests we've seen a lot of in the last year or so, also at the weekend, and now holding placards saying we stand with Iran and things like that. I mean, it literally is the same as people walking through London in 1940 with banners saying, be on the right side of history with a picture of Adolf Hitler on it. That's what we're talking about here. The Germans are right. Stand with Germany. Really? Stand with Germany? That's precisely what we're talking about here. And then you get into the modern world where those words, which would have been dangerous back then, but are far more dangerous now because they travel. And as they travel, they take on more baggage. They take on more potency through the online world and into the real world. And that's why you have to be very careful about what you allow people to join and what is reasonable to join. And Richard here, Ricky in York, says, I suggest all those idiots who are waving their pro-Iran, pro-Hamas placards, but happily living safely in Britain should be arrested or sent to the country they support. These are the enemy within. If there was a war between the UK and any of the countries on the placards, it is easy to see which country the placard waver would support. Those placards would soon be replaced by weapons and used against patriots, including myself, who are still among us, but who are wary of showing our patriotism on a placard. Thank you, says Ricky in York. Yeah, and that's a completely fair point as well. Let's go to Ian down in London. What's happening, Ian? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
I'll tell you something. Half these guys, or whoever's doing it, the girls as well, half of them that are protesting haven't got a clue of what they're protesting about. There is more to it, but I'll come back to that in a second. First of all, the biggest backers of Iran is supposed to be China and Russia.
Yeah.
America can deal with Russia very easy. Look, you've got your own problems in Ukraine. They've got to sort that out. That's why they're not getting involved. With China, as Trump would say, he loves to do a deal, right? As a salesman, I'd say to China very simply, if Iran blocks the strait between the Gulf and coming through to the Mediterranean, the shortcut to bring trade, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. If you block that, we are not going to get our goods from China into Europe, which is our biggest trade partner, which is going to cost us a lot of money. Do not do it. You do that, we will give you no backing whatsoever.
Yeah.
And Iran will be absolutely out on its ear. And that's the way China should be. And America's got to push China to do it. Because, then they say, well...
Yeah, I mean, China's the interesting one on all of this, isn't it? Because it's a powerhouse in so many ways, but it's not a powerhouse without vulnerabilities.
No, and quite simply, they want money.
Correct.
Same as everybody else
Yeah.
wants.
And they want to retain their dominance. And I know it's not a country that Donald Trump, he does this strange thing of saying China are great, I get on very well with them, and then simultaneously saying, China are a bunch of nutters and, we want to beat them in every respect we can, get rid of all the industry we've got over there and bring it over here, all of that stuff. So you'd think there would be some wiggle room for a sort of a negotiation with China.
Oh, absolutely, because China will look at it and say, wait a minute, hold on, Europe is being sort of, we can't sell anything to Europe because it's going to cost treble the amount to get the goods to them.
True.
Right? We need the money. America's the same. The only part that we can put a bit more pressure on Iran to do something. But we're going back to the protesters. Sorry, I always do this. I jump from one thing to the other.
That's all right.
That's
do it
my
all
problem.
day. I do it all day.
Right? Is with the protesters, what makes me laugh? You ask any of these ones that are pro-Hamas or pro-Palestine, quite simply, what are you actually having a go about? And they'll say, it's about what Israel's doing. It's not, because every time you see the protests and when they do their marches, where do they go in the first place? The Jewish synagogues. Well, wait a minute. Are you against Israel? Or are you against the synagogues?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that kind of exposes the reality, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's like even with our friends, the mainstream media, the other two, if you want, Sky and BBC, they're pushing all the time, but they never put the other side out. I just don't know why they don't keep showing what happened on October the 7th.
They were, I don't know how much they can show, but if you're talking about the video evidence, I did notice, was it a week ago, that the BBC got in trouble for being too pro-Israeli on when they're reporting deaths, which I thought was rather interesting. Listen, Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. You will always find that kind of... I can't remember what the specific story was, but the suggestion was that the BBC are not as gracious or as honest about deaths in Gaza as they are of deaths in Israel. Not a conclusion I've gleaned from watching the BBC, I have to tell you. Before we talk to John in Dorset, we have the Voice of Doom. It's day 8 of the Voice of Doom. It's a mystery voice, of course, with a political angle. You're looking for an MP, past or present, might not even be longer an MP, might even be alive. But one question remains. Who is this?
I can't guarantee that.
Who is that person? 87222. Don't phone, just message if you want to take part. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
It is true. It's not Michael Howard, I can tell you that much. It's not Michael Howard, nor is it... Who's the other regular guesses? It's definitely not Michael Howard, anyway. If we get a right answer, we'll tell you after the news. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
Who is that? 87222. Hopefully, on day 8, somebody gets it right. Let's talk to John in Dorset. What have you got for us, John? Afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ian. I'm just wondering, having previously served in Northern Ireland and other places, who's going to be the first serviceman that gets thrown under a bus when some protester goes to damage an aircraft, gets arrested, and there'll be a queue of civil rights lawyers? After all, if they can go after the SAS for things that happened. Yeah. And I remember in Northern Ireland, the kids used to do chicken races at roadblocks, and 2 lads got shot. The squaddies manning that roadblock didn't know what was in the car. Yeah. Was it an attempt to run them down? Was somebody going to take a pot shot as they went past?
Yeah.
And all I would say to these protesters, you might get away at Bryce Norton. It's been underinvested and underprotected for years, and I've flown in and out there many times. I did hear on one of the media programs this morning that they were considering Mildenhall. I think they should be very, very careful. Mildenhall is United States territory. The Americans are de facto in a war alert position. They know the Iranians will come. And the first one, it won't be Greenham Common with those nice British policemen telling those lovely women, don't go over the fence, girls, it's very naughty.
Yep.
They go in, they go near an American aircraft, they will be shot, and they will bloody well deserve it.
Yeah, and it's mere luck for them that nothing happened when they were in Bryce Norton, as you rightly say. there's clearly a lack of security or something there. We await the internal investigation in terms of what it reveals. Thank you, John, for that. Brad says, I just saw an image on the news from the protest that is taking place. This is the Palestine Action protest, Trafalgar Square, right now. I think it's got to be done and dusted by 3. There's a man dressed in a striped top, bottoms and cap, as worn by Jews in concentration camps. This isn't free speech or freedom of expression. These people are going way too far. Well, they are moronic, but they are potentially dangerous because of what they do. But of course they think, and this is the problem with the argument, they think they're punching up. So they don't see it like that. You can say anything about Jews and Israel, it's fine. You can put the UK and the US in there as well. But particularly Jews and Israel are just evil. They are the enemy. Wipe them out, get rid of them if you can. And that's fine because they're the instigators of bad stuff as far as they're concerned. They literally have that kind of 6-year-old polarity, this curious, odd black and whiteness over this. And they can't see it. They genuinely believe it, Brad, and that's half the problem. 0344 499 1000. We'll go to more of your comment. Is Donald Trump making the world a safer place? And hopefully we have an answer to the voice of doom. Here's the voice.
I can't guarantee that.
Who's that then? 87222 if you think you know. Let's get the news at 3.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Lots to get through. Iran has warned the United States to expect heavy consequences for those strikes on its nuclear sites at the weekend, threatening that American involvement in the conflict with Israel will expand, this is the quote, will expand the scope of legitimate targets. What do they mean by legitimate targets? What are they talking about? How would their response even work in practice? We'll have more on that. Has Donald Trump, curiously, made the world a safer place, despite all of this? Also this afternoon, Palestine Action will be proscribed as a terrorist organisation. This is according to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. She said this as 3 members of the group, possibly more now, have been arrested by police at a protest in Trafalgar Square. That protest at the moment is legitimate. If you fast forward about a week, it won't be, because this will be a terrorist organisation. So being part of it or supporting it will become an offence. And judges will no longer have to refer to criminal defendants by the gender of their choice in an update after the Supreme Court's transgender ruling. That was always an uncomfortable fit, wasn't it? And we'll look at the story in more detail in a few moments. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk. And let's go to our next story. And by the way, when it comes to stuff of our times that completely royally bamboozles us, this is absolutely one of them. Just before we do, let's do the Voice of Doom. Before the news, we played you it was day 8 of the Voice of Doom. Let's have a listen to the voice.
I can't guarantee that.
Have we got a winner? Who is that? Some of the guests is Jonathan Aitken, Neil Martin, David Lammy, Menzies Campbell, Richard Dimbleby, Steve Davis. Is that Steve Davis, the snooker player? Leon Britton, Cranley Onslow, Sir Jin Stevens. Is that made up? Who's called Sir Jin? Ben Habib, no. Norman Lamont, no. James Hacker, no. Ian Duncan Smith, no. In fact, we haven't got a winner still, which means it rolls over to tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll get an answer then. 2:45 tomorrow on the programme. Oh, somebody says Bob in Arbroath. No, it's definitely not him either. Now, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has confirmed Palestine Action will be banned as a terrorist group after activists caused millions in damage during a break-in at RAF Bryce Norton. A draft order goes to Parliament next week, placing the group in the same legal category of Hamas and Al-Qaeda. It comes as 3 members have been arrested after clashing with police at a protest in Trafalgar Square today. We'll get a legal perspective on this in a moment. First, Will Geddes, security specialist, often helps us out with these kind of stories. Afternoon to you, Will. Always good to have you with us. Initially, I was a bit uncomfortable with governments just simply saying, well, we disagree with them, so therefore they're a terrorist group, you know, free speech and all of that, even if we don't like the cut of their jib. This seems to be rather exceptional. They've taken tough action. They've done it quite quickly. So is it a pat on the back for the Home Secretary, Will?
Yeah, afternoon, Ian. Yes, it is, and it's about time as well. One of the biggest problems is that there are many of these protest groups of various shapes and sizes, some of which work in isolation, others which will join up with other causes that may not necessarily be that directly related. But what we do certainly know about Palestine Action is that within the 5 years that they've been around, they've caused a heck of a lot of disruption, and they fit into that terrorist category in terms of the fact, and this is most evident recently with the attack in Bryce Norton, that they are trying to influence the government in terms of their position of Israel, supporting Israel, and particularly Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, this was, you know, clearly, the news at the weekend of Trump's bombing in Iran almost gives this another gloss, does it not, in terms of how we perceive what is happening. We saw a protest on Saturday, the usual sort of anti-Israel, well, apparently pro-Palestinian protest, people holding banners, freedom to Iran, and, you know, we support the Ayatollah, and all this kind of nonsense. You can't quite make it up, but these people live among us, Will. And it sits against all of that, I guess, you know, while you know, America are trying to defend freedoms, these people want to sit on the other side of this argument, curiously.
Well, you know, to a certain extent, yes, Ian, but there's also the fact that there are a lot of very anarchic elements that are sort of attaching themselves to whatever agenda it might be. I've been working against some of those anarchic elements over the last couple of months, and the sort of damage that they've been trying to run against particular clients, particular companies, and running disruption tactics against them. And the one thing that I can say about these anarchic elements is more often than not, and they don't really have any particular opinion. They're just criminal. They want to cause chaos. They want to basically damage property. They haven't got it deep rooted in their system. And many of these people, certainly when I've sat down and talked to them, and I went to the protest that's going on right now in Trafalgar Square and got amongst it and amongst the various people there. And I can tell you, most of them probably don't even know what they're standing and protesting for.
Yeah.
And there are half-wits, which are completely misinformed and ill-informed as to what it is they're supposedly protesting and aligning to.
Yeah, and that isn't that so often the case with protests. And, you know, holding a banner of the Ayatollah saying, you know, be on the right side of history and stuff like that. I mean, you know, you do have to wonder where that thinking comes from. Well, I appreciate not everybody thinks the same thing. I appreciate you can be neutral on something. I understand nuance. You know, you can go, you know, no one's suggesting Israel always covers itself in glory, or the United States, or Great Britain. You know, we all get that. But when you're bold enough to literally hold up a picture of the leader of Iran as the good guy, I mean, you have something wrong with you, right?
Yeah, completely. And I mean, again, you know, there are, you know, the government don't take it very seriously as to who they prescribe as a terrorist organization, and you know, it will go through a process. And certainly Palestine Action will now be the 82nd, you know, organization in this country that is designated as a prescribed terrorist group. Now, Palestine Action, for example, yes, they've targeted companies like Elbit, which is an Israeli arms manufacturer, and they've tried to target that sector. But I mean, I go back into the 90s where I worked against some of the animal rights groups and some of the more vigilant groups, which would turn up outside directors' homes, ambush, physically assault them, and try and beat up their families. You know, you've got the same elements here today. But certainly, you know, individuals they seem to forget that we are in a country where they can protest. If they went and did those protests, the countries that they're supposedly protesting for, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, there is that as well. Will, listen, as ever, thank you. Will Geddes, security specialist. Let's get a legal angle on this. Raj Chowdhury is a lawyer with Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors. Raj, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
As I said there, you will have heard me speaking with Will. You know, whether I like the cut of someone's jib or their campaign is largely irrelevant. I was equally concerned this morning about the legal power of a Home Secretary. I think we should, living in a democracy, always be, you know, interested in what our political masters do in our name, etc. Clearly, Yvette Cooper, as the Home Secretary, one would assume, sits there with an impressive team of lawyers. But prescribing somebody as a terrorist group should not be the work of a moment. And I don't say that with any sympathy to a terrorist group or any other group for that matter. But in a free society where freedom of speech is not always comfortable, it's not always everyone's cup of tea, this should be, you know, treated very, very carefully in how we define organisations that we might just not like very much.
It should be treated enormously carefully. By designating an organization as a terrorist organization, you're saying that membership of that organization is not simply a criminal offense, it is a terrorist offense. By saying the words, I support Palestine Action, you are leaving yourself open to an imprisonment term of up to 14 years. So it is one of the most egregious breaches of your right to free speech, and you need to be really careful and clear if that's what you want to do.
But they are an organisation, as we understand it, that we know that their protests previously have been largely more in the kind of, and I don't say this with sympathy, but more in the sort of just stop oil department, spraying paint, etc. But of course, what happened last week took it to many people's thinking, Raj, to another level, breaking into an RAF military base, damaging to the cost of God knows what it cost to repair one of those engines on a big old plane like that. And of course, it was into, you know, sovereign military territory, and that was to many a game changer.
Well, there's two aspects to that. Firstly, let's look at the 81 other organisations that are banned. Not one of them are banned because of risks about criminal damage. I know that serious criminal damage is within the legislative framework, and you can designate terrorism because of that, but not one of the 81 are. There are groups like Al-Qaeda, groups like ISIS, where there is serious violence, what you regard as terrorism. And secondly, this idea about a base. We all now know that 20 years ago, before the second Iraq war, a group of protesters sought to go into an army base, an RAF base, and tried to disable planes taking off for that war. Those individuals got what's called conditional discharges, the lowest possible penalty in a criminal court. the lowest possible penalty for the same offence for which these Palestine Action members are allegedly have committed. How have we as a society and as a legal community gone from that to designating them as terrorism? It is quite simply, in my view, wrong, and it will easily be challengeable.
As I understand it, Raj, there is more to this group than just spraying paint in places we don't like, and their affiliations, their loyalties are very much with regimes such as Iran. Iran would be, only too pleased if they haven't said it out loud. In fact, I'm sure the Ayatollah's never heard of these people, but you take my point. It is, very much in the same ballpark as supporting Iran and having loyalties with Iran would be seen as another factor that the Home Secretary would have taken into account.
Let's really challenge that and see what the evidence is for that. I have not seen any evidence of that whatsoever, and that may well be a slur against Palestine Action. There is no evidence of any of the actions that I've been defended that any of the members have supported foreign regimes in the way that you suggested. Needs to be clear evidence rather than simply ministers going on telly saying this or that.
Could it be said, and would it be understandable that, if this was a couple of years ago, we might not be in this position, even if Palestine Action did carry out the same protest at RAF Bryce Norton. But because of where we are now, America going into Iran, things escalating, could that be a factor in what the Home Secretary was thinking here, that, these are exceptional times, if you like? Strange things happen in exceptional times. People get 31 months for something they wrote on Twitter, even if it was horrendous and grossly offensive and racist. That wouldn't happen in normal times. This wouldn't happen in normal times, but we're not in normal times. Is that the thinking of Yvette Cooper?
It is the job, surely, of a frontline politician to take emotion away from this rather than be reactive and react to a tabloid headline. If it was okay 20 years ago, when Britain itself was at war, surely what has changed now? And what has changed is the level of intolerance, the level of autocratic rule, really, by those in government. That's what this is about. This is not about keeping us safe. This is not about enhancing our democracy. It is, to me, quite amazing, your previous speaker saying that we live in a democracy, we can change the rules. Those that want to protest about this today, those that wanted to say, well, actually, Parliament shouldn't do that. We're not allowed to protest outside Parliament. That is really entering 1984 territory, that whenever the law is being made to say this group should be a terrorist organisation.
Is that not just a security issue, Raj? Is that not somebody saying, hang on a second, look, we don't know who's among these people. What happened with RAF Bryce Norton was a step further than we've seen this group go before. We need to keep our eye on that. You only want one lone nutter in that group to take it a little further than daubing paint on things. So why take it to Parliament? Why allow that to happen?
It's our seat of government that cannot be lobbied. Is that what the Metropolitan Police are now saying?
Well, would you put if you were in charge of that decision, though, should this group, bearing in mind where we're at, the ambience, the atmosphere of the world right now, particularly the Middle East, would you say, yep, go and protest right outside the front door where 300 MPs are sitting?
If I wasn't in court today, I'd be protesting with them in relation to the fact that our fundamental rights are being abridged, being breached.
Would you be protesting? So would you be protesting against the banning of the protesters, or would you be protesting for the cause?
I would be protesting to say that the protest shouldn't be banned, and certainly I would be indicating that this prescription is potentially unlawful.
I was about to say, where does it go then now? So I think the Home Secretary's got a week or something to try and get this into action, as it were. I mean, who's likely to challenge? Are you going to challenge this? Are you going to take this to the Home Office?
It is firstly subject to procedures in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So each member gets a vote, and it can only pass if there is a majority in both houses. So firstly, there's a parliamentary issue here. And then secondly, it can be appealed to a special commission, if you like, and those who are representing Palestine Action or others may decide to take it to that commission.
It is all mixed in, though, isn't it? Iran, Palestine. I mean, look, I get it. We are talking about, you know, these are not unconnected events, but there is that sense when we saw people at the weekend on Saturday, you know, essentially carrying those banners with, you know, the Ayatollah is on the right side of history. I mean, this is barking mad territory, isn't it?
You may say it's barking mad, and lots of us would find it distasteful to support the Ayatollah. But again, you've been very clear in the past about whatever people think, you shouldn't automatically ban them. You shouldn't automatically label them as terrorists. And again, what is the evidence that the person who was carrying that banner that you say you saw, I never saw it, had anything to do with Palestine Action? There are a number of groups, different groups, and it's just so dangerous. And another example I'll simply give you, that Britain First isn't prescribed. They are an organisation that people who have committed violence, who have murdered MPs, have cited in support when committing those murders.
I don't think the organisation has murdered anybody. I say that just as a legal defence of the actuality.
I was very careful that I didn't say the organisation had, but individuals who have committed acts of violence have cited that organisation as support. So where there is no violence against persons, surely we can't be designating them as terrorism. Can you really imagine that in 2000, when this legislation was being passed, when we were thinking about Al-Qaeda, about threats to national security, the framers of the legislation were saying, that what I'm really worried about is if somebody puts paint through on a warplane. Really?
I mean, if you phrase it like that, but it was a bit more than that. It's wrecked a warplane that can't take off now. It can't be used if the country needed to defend itself. That's why it's taken the perception of Palestine Action into a different territory, hasn't it? It's immobilised military plant and capability. That feels to many people like an act of terrorism.
Well, certainly, I think if people were blowing up airplanes and so on, you can see that it's within what most people would regard as the definition of terrorism. I don't accept that this would be regarded either as the framers in 2000 or now as terrorism. One also has to remember, you've talked about the context of Iran, you've talked about the Ayatollah. These are individuals who say that Israel is committing a genocide. And that is the issue that we should be talking about. So I'm really not clear how prescription is going to assist in this process.
Well, we will watch with interest. Raj, thank you very much for your time. So Raj Chadha, lawyer with Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors. He's quite clear. This is not a terror group, and you wouldn't stand a chance of making the case that it was a terror group in a court of law. I'm slightly paraphrasing him, but I don't think that underplays or misrepresents what he was saying. Look, I said at the very beginning, this is kind of where left-wing thinking sort of, you know, the horseshoe of right-wing, left-wing, in the same way that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump found themselves oddly agreeing on quite a lot of stuff. It's that sort of territory. But I'm not assuming, and what many of you have said this afternoon, a few of our guests, is actually that Palestine Action have more than just hopes of disrupting or protesting against the odd military base. Some have suggested their affinities are there on their website to see. I'm just simply quoting what I'm pretty sure someone said to us earlier. If you go to their website, it's all there. You know, they're pro-Iran, they're pro this, they're pro that. Therefore, a bit of an enemy. Does that make them a terrorist group? Because it's a genuinely important question. I know the instinct is to go, yeah, lock them up. Got into an RAF base. What next? A bomb? They would go, well, no, it would never be a bomb. It's not what we do. We paint stuff. Yeah, we cause criminal damage. Doesn't make us a terrorist. That's the argument. And I kind of get it, because I want to believe in free speech and I don't want to live in a dictatorship like Iran, where you wouldn't be able to have organisations that are against the government or against a governmental decision. You hear what I'm saying? 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
A rape charge against a man staying in an asylum hotel was deliberately kept quiet. Guess what? Officials feared inflaming community tension. I'm fed up with... I'll tell you why. They don't trust the British public to handle this information. We know anyway what is going on. We're not idiots. And how dare they blame us for fanning community tensions? They're the ones doing this by bringing in all of these undocumented men.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, this one from Mike in Lincoln. Once an organisation crossed the line of sabotaging military assets, and when their funding stream is questionable, then free speech is no longer an argument you can hide behind. Indeed, their actions were treasonous and should be treated as such, says Mike, and I get that as well. They would say that there is no funding because there's nothing to fund, really. They're just a bunch of weirdos that, you know, probably don't like the West very much, and that's kind of, I don't know. I'm trying to work out how this pans out legally and where it sits in the kind of context of our values that are not Iranian values, and we allow protest even if we don't like it, all of that kind of caper. You're familiar with all the arguments. Alan is in Aberdeen on this point. What have you got for us, Alan? Hi.
Hi, Ian. I'm surprised that it's taken so long to prescribe them, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm concerned, when you're saying and shouting and screaming that you support, you know, Palestinian Action, what you're actually saying is you support the rape, the murder, the kidnapping, the beheading, the sex slavery of men, women, children and babies. You are openly supporting terrorism and terrorist groups.
Can you not simply be supporting Palestinian people?
Tell me something. Where were these people before the 7th of October? They suddenly show up after the 7th of October attack. Why?
Because they will say, you know the argument though, Alan, you know, that their argument is always that Israel are the bad guys. Their response is disproportionate. Too many kids are dying, so that's why they want action. Or something like that.
No, as far as I'm concerned, these people, most of them showed up on the day of the 7th of October. They weren't supporting the victims. And Israel and the people of Israel are the victims here.
100%.
But they turned up in support of the Islamic jihadists from the 7th of October. Or even Palestinian Action was pretty much praising Hamas on the day of the 7th of October.
Well, I agree, because often,
yeah,
often, you know, whether it's this group or any other group, you know, what I constantly hear is, oh, no, you know, it's the Palestinian people. And I get that. I understand, you know, nobody wants to see civilians killed. But I also think that a lot of these people do actually support Hamas. I think they believe that Hamas are actually okay. They're all right people.
I have absolutely no doubt. I pretty much said since the 7th of October, and I've been to Israel 3 times since then, but I pretty much said that every single jihadist is now under the Pali flag. Every single one of them. Pretty much that flag is no different to the ISIS flag. Yeah. Most of them, a lot of them, they're now basically recruiting. They're creating nothing but hate in Britain, and now it's leading to attacks on businesses, onto our own defence. But I'll tell you what, it's going to lead on to you know, like the Manchester Arena and things like this is what it's good because you're radicalising these people, and these people are under that flag, radicalising these people. But, you know, and these people, they couldn't go to Iran. You're seeing them with the Ayatollah. Ask where the money's coming from these groups, and don't tell me the money's not coming, been slipped through from the likes of Iran, from Qatar.
They would say there's no money. They don't have any money. They're just a bunch of bozos with a bucket of paint.
I think you'll find. You know, that stuff's not free. You know, the organisation, the signs, everything that goes along with it.
Yeah.
It's not free, and I think the government will be looking at that. But they need to be looking seriously, not only into Palestinian Action, but they need to start looking into a lot of the other groups now as well.
Yeah.
Because basically, these groups are all the same. They're all linked in one way or another. And if you look at the marches, you'll see the same people, the same organisers, the same, you know. So
yeah, and also sitting on the... Yes, I don't imagine that Palestine Action are any different to the kind of people that were waving support for the Ayatollah at the weekend either. I think they're firmly, you know, encircled in the same kind of... They're in the thick of it, that ideology. Alan, thank you for that. Passionate, informative stuff from Alan in Aberdeen. Cliff says, personally, I don't think those that entered Bryce Norton and damaged the planes on their stealth e-bikes were terrorists, nor do I believe they are vandals, as suggested by Starmer. I think they're criminals at best or saboteurs and should be treated as such. We've created a rod for our own back by pandering to aggressive single-issue groups on the altar of multiculturalism. Blair and all have a lot to answer for, says Cliff. Thank you for that. More coming up. We are going to talk about that issue of gender identity and what it means in a courtroom. Helen Joyce, always great to have Helen with us, is going to be with us in a couple of moments' time. And then back to you as well, 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
Just gone 3:30. More calls and comments and messages in a couple of moments. But first, this: judges no longer have to use a defendant's chosen gender after a Supreme Court ruling that says sex is based on biology. The ruling, of course, states non-binary identities don't have legal status and courts can reject preferred pronouns. By the way, spoiler alert, non-binary is just an invented thing that somebody came up with. It doesn't have any, you won't find a biologist that can put their name to that. So courts can reject preferred pronouns. It also means that suspects can use single-sex services for the opposite sex. Joining me, Helen Joyce, Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters, author of Trans, Gender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. Good afternoon to you, Helen.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Do you know, I even feel, you know, you and I have talked about this many times, I even feel a bit embarrassed just reading all of that out, because it's all so bonkers. And if somebody was sitting there in 1987 or something listening to this, they go, what is that man talking about? Gender and pronouns and non-binary and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I've got a feeling that a courtroom didn't have to use anyone's pronouns if they didn't fancy it, but for some reason, everybody joined in with this thing for a while.
Yeah, so this particular one is about a publication called the Equal Treatment Bench Book, which is by judges for judges. And it started with the good idea of helping judges to run their courtrooms fairly, thereby having fewer challenges. You know, for example, thinking about, you know, if you have a deaf or a blind witness, or if somebody who needs a translator, or if you have a disabled person who may find it hard to get into the stand, that sort of thing. But it got captured by gender ideology. And I think several years ago now, it said that you would never be able to ask somebody's actual sex. You had to accept everybody as the sex they said they were, that you had to use whatever pronouns they said for themselves, that you would expect witnesses to do the same. And, you know, as rapidly as just that, it came to be that we had rape cases where women were told that they were expected to use she, her pronouns for a man they knew had raped them, and that they would have to listen to the whole court doing the same thing. I mean, obviously re-victimising the woman. And it's taken a long time to get this back out. We've been campaigning to get it back out, and it now seems the Supreme Court judgment has given that push to the court system. Yeah, and in one notable case, of course, a defendant who changed their pronouns halfway through a case. So you ended up with this almost, it would be farcical if it wasn't such a serious story. That suddenly, and I noted newspapers and media organisations suddenly talking about her and she, and I'm thinking, no, it's a male rapist we're talking about here. And everybody just kind of went along with it. And that's partly what was wrong here. And that's the second reason why this is so important. When we've talked to media organisations that insist on calling men who murdered and raped and tortured women paedophiles and the like, and hardly any paedophiles are female, by the way, really hardly any, and we say to them, why are you calling these terrible men women? They say, because the court did, because that's what the judge did, and it's what, you know, the various lawyers did. So now that that excuse is going to be gone for them, I'd like to see the media actually referring to dangerous men as men, even when those men don't like it. 100%, and you've just put it very well a second ago, Helen, when I'd never even thought about, you know, the victim sitting there who has been brutalised, raped by a man, only to be told, no, it wasn't a man, it was a woman, which, you know, in many respects kind of almost dilutes the severity of it. It certainly is a, you know, curious, almost dystopian exercise in rewiring someone's memory or their thinking. I mean, it's not just wrong, it's obscenely wrong. And it makes it hard for them to give evidence. People have to be supported to use what they regard as honest evidence. I mean, we swear to tell the truth when we give evidence. We don't swear to lie because a bad person wants us to lie. Yeah, spot on. So this is good news, and it comes alongside another little bit of good news. We should mention Martine Croxall, who's a BBC newsreader. It's not often we give a little doff our cap to the BBC on this programme, but on this occasion, she brilliantly, while reading the autocue, decided that while she saw the words pregnant people, decided to, well, let's say, give it the true word that should have been there. Let's have a look at what Martine Croxall did.
London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine has released research which says that nearly 600 heat-related deaths are expected in the UK. Malcolm Mystery, who is involved in the research, says that the aged, pregnant people, women, and those with pre-existing health conditions need to take precautions.
You can hear it there, and I mentioned this a second ago, Helen. As she's building up to it, she clearly clocks the line a few words ahead of her and thinks, pregnant people. She read it and then corrected it. I thought that was great, wasn't it?
It really was. And I mean, 100% of all people who have ever been pregnant are women, and we are indeed people. But what the backstory to that is this pretense that men can get pregnant too. It's actually women who identify as men who are getting pregnant, obviously.
Yes.
And it's just erasure of the actual fact that there are two sexes. The two sexes are different. There are things that only women can do and only men can do. And one of those is pregnancy. 100% of everyone who's ever been pregnant is a woman, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, spot on. Obviously, what had happened there, the press release from the organisation that she was talking about had put as do many of these institutions for reasons I've never been able to get to the bottom of, but we sort of know how the journey began. I'd written pregnant people, and then a producer had just lobbed it into the script without necessarily thinking, really, are we still doing this pregnant people thing? I mean, we know the NHS has been there. We've had chest feeding and God knows what else over the years, but she corrected it, and in a curious way, I think that's more than just, I certainly hope it's more than just a sort of a bit of a funny moment on the news. I hope it kind of sets a bit of a precedent for other people in the media to really think about this when they're putting scripts and stories together.
I wouldn't be so sure that it wasn't someone at the BBC who changed the word women to people.
Quite
it could have happened the way you say it, but it could also have happened because some woke producer fixed it.
Yeah, but it would be nice if this did set some kind of standard now.
Absolutely. I mean, especially after we know that Justin on the Today programme was told off for saying that trans women were male. He was told he was meant to say biologically male. There is no way to be male except biologically. And yet that was decided to be, wrong speak on his part. So maybe the BBC is getting there slowly.
Naughty Justin. What's he like? Listen, Helen, great to have you on with us. As ever, Helen Joyce with us on the programme. Helen, of course, is Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters and the author of Trans, Gender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. It will forever be... I've heard kids, 11-year-olds, because my eldest is 11, refer to this, is somebody trans? And this would never have been a thing. Never, ever would it have been a thing, half an hour ago, that we would be debating or discussing that at 11. You would never have been kind of in that territory. It wouldn't have come up. I'm not suggesting it's contaminated everybody's minds, but it is kind of weird when that gets mentioned. And a kid, there was a school play recently, and some kid was talking about, the boys wearing makeup in the school play, and it came with the line, "They're not trans," and they're not they're not I never thought they were. Really? That's now in the lexicon as kind of, it's common phraseology these days. Strange times. Gary's in Kent. Back to what we were discussing, Gary. Iran, what are your thoughts? Good afternoon.
Hi there, is that Ian for Seven Oaks on the line?
Absolutely right. How's it going, Gary?
I was in Knoll Park the other day walking the dog.
Say that again?
I was in Knoll Park just the other
nice.
day. Yeah, and the reason I bring up Seven Oaks is because I'm going to come back to it in just a tick.
Okay.
But if you go back, you were discussing the Ballymena riots and Carrickfergus and contrasting them with Southport, and you were trying to get to, what was the angst that fueled those riots? It wasn't just the isolated incident.
Correct.
It was in a wider context of people's anxiety and sort of, all of that.
Yeah, how some events sort of spark up, not always directly linked to the original event.
Exactly, that's the whole thing. So my question really is, do you think a disturbance like that could happen in Seven Oaks, for example, a sort of commuter belt that's full of, middle class and their houses of...
Yeah, where people rise up.
Yeah, where people rise up in anger. Now, when I went to buy a house in that area some years ago, I walked into Ibbot Moseley on the high street and I said, I'd like to buy a house. And he said, how much you got? And I said, 250 grand. She says, well, you won't get something in Seven Oaks on the hill for that. Brightness overhead. Now, that will probably mean a bit to you, but for your wider listener, that's probably the less celebrated part. That it's more estatey down there, populated more by white van man.
Yeah.
Right, say you're an incident like Southport in a
kindergarten down there or anywhere in Sevenoaks, it might be there that you get the trouble. And that's not people.
Gary, your phone line is sadly keeps cutting out on us, but I think the broad point of what you're raising is a good one in terms of, you know, what it sometimes takes, that what Malcolm Gladwell called the tipping point, where almost out of nowhere, that really is the phrase, almost out of nowhere, something just happens. Ordinarily, if I was being glib about it, I'd say, well, in Sevenoaks, if Gale's, the bakery, doesn't open on time, there's nearly a protest. It could be that. You know, the croissants weren't quite as warm as we thought, and they were totally out of brioche. But I get the point that sometimes there is a moment, and it's not always, and Southport is a really good example of it. Nobody was ever defending the bad stuff and the racism and the horrifying attacks on police. Nobody was. But a bit like BLM in the States, where almost a countrywide riot broke out after what had happened with George Floyd. No one could defend that, but there were people like Keir Starmer saying, well, you have to understand the reasons behind it, and I think you do. I'd like to think as a country we're getting more in tune with reasons behind things and getting to understand that in the world we live in, which is a bit more instantaneous, social media, people haven't really got a clue in authority as to the fuel that social media provides to debates that previously might have just kind of been in a certain area for half an hour and then stopped. And social media has changed all of that. AI is going to change it again, and that's going to be potentially catastrophic because half of it won't even be true. But you take the point. So we do live in a different world. We need to take things on from a different angle, and we sometimes need to be brave enough, which is why our Prime Minister was not just woeful. He was, offensively woeful. He was dismissively woeful on the right-wing thug thing. Because there was a great opportunity for Keir Starmer to have condemned the bad stuff, condemned it absolutely, including some of the stuff that was written on social media. Condemn it all. Condemn the bad stuff. That's what I want my Prime Minister to do. We all know what the bad stuff looks like and sounds like. Condemn it. Nick the people responsible for it. Throwing bricks at coppers, setting fire to buildings, all of those people. But simultaneously, whether he liked it or not, there is a narrative that was bubbling about immigration in this country. And it might have then come up through an unconventional, the most horrific background, which I know is not directly connected to the discussion, but it became connected to it. And that's irredeemable. So as a Prime Minister, he should have gone, yeah, do you know what? I also understand it's not in his DNA. And I don't even know whether Rishi Sunak would have done that had he won the election either. Thank you to Gary. Gary, sorry, your line, absolutely, we kept with it for as long as we could, but it choked out in the end. I think the carburettor went. Thank you to Gary in Kent. Also some breaking news. A British national has been injured in Israel during a missile attack by Iran. This is according to David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. He's also told the House of Commons that an RAF flight of 63 British nationals left Israel on its way to Cyprus, with more to come. This is for want of a better phrase, the evacuation of trying to get people out of the country who want to leave the country under advice. But that is the latest. A British national injured during a missile attack by Iran, confirmed by the Foreign Secretary David Lammy. And that RAF flight has taken off with 63 British nationals leaving on its way to Cyprus. It is Talk 0344 499 1000. Now, a bit of light news here for you. The reunion of the century just around the corner. We are, of course, talking Oasis. We're giving you a chance to win a pair of Oasis tickets for Manchester, July the 19th. It's just around the corner. You heard that right. Oasis Live 25. It's sold out. You wouldn't get tickets for love nor money. Do you remember how you all tried on the day? So did we at home as well. But Talk can get you in. But that's not all. Alongside the ticket, we'll put you up for a night in a hotel, put $5,000 in your back pocket. Man alive, you can do a lot. That can cause some dents in Manchester of an evening. Completely tax-free. So it's a big, big package there. The Oasis ticket, the hotel, £5,000, what's not to like? Here's the detail of everything you need to know and how to enter.
Alright, kid. You have to be over 18 to enter in the UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win a pair of tickets to the most electrifying rock and roll reunion of the century, a hotel stay, and £5,000 spending money, all you gotta do is text the word WIN to 83338 by Monday the 7th of July at 11 p.m. and you'll be entered into the draw to go supersonic this summer. Sorted. Right, here's all the legal stuff. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You've got to have the bill payer's permission or post your name and number to Oasis Prize Draw, PO Box 3190, Colchester, CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of July. This is a TalkSport limited promotion run on TalkSport, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full T's and C's at talksport.com.
Keir Starmer was actively undermining that strategy. Because Keir Starmer was wandering around saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry. Donald Trump doesn't mean it. It's just noise. It's just the hawks in Washington just beating the drum. It's not really going to happen." So at the same time that Keir Starmer was basically calling for de-escalation, his words had the practical effect of undermining that strategy. And you can't have the British Prime Minister conducting foreign policy in complete ignorance.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just gone 10 to 4. Jeremy Carr will be in very, very soon. Chris is in Epsom in the meantime. How you doing, Chris?
Hi, Ian. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. What have you got for us, Chris?
I'll be as quick as I can, 'cause I know you've got... I'm 59 this year, I'll be 60 next year, coming on in a couple of minutes.
We can't hear you too well, Chris. You're normally on a lovely crystal clear line. What's happened? Hello? Man down, man down. We'll get Chris back on, because he's there somewhere. This one says, Ian, why don't we have pro-Israel marches or anti-migrant marches? Are they not allowed? Well, there's a surprise. Not. I think they are allowed, but I don't know how you'd... Like the anti-migrant one, I guess the old bill would go, we can see how this might go. That would be their contention. Chris, we've got you back.
Yeah.
Hey, that's better.
I'll be as quick as I can, because I'm 59 this year, I'll be 60 next year coming on in a minute.
Go on.
I agree with what you said earlier about watching the government if it's too easy to make things terrorist groups. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because I've got nothing but...
contempt?
Contempt, yeah, I was trying to find a word without a swear word in it. Yeah, contempt for the Palestine Action group. But there's no need to do that, Ian. So Mark Rowley could show some backbone now and put all the members' doors in at the top of the pile tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock and arrest them for joint venture. It was a criminal activity that they all knew about and they boasted about.
Yeah.
That's a joint venture, criminal conviction.
It's a good point. Yeah, I don't know how many are even in this organisation, by the way. I mean, there could be 10 of them. It might be 2010.
Well, this is the problem, because there's so many useful idiots out there.
Yeah.
Do you know they got 300,000 followers? So take off 1,000 for security forces following them. That's 299,000.
You're right about that last point. Great, love it, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. Darren says if Palestine Action don't want to be prescribed as a terrorist group, then I'd suggest this. First, they pay the full cost of the damage they've done, currently estimated at 35 million. Second, they hand over the people responsibility for the damage to the military police. Sounds fair enough, Jeremy?
Totally fair. The group vandalised 2 planes at RAF Bryce Norton, right?
Yeah.
So
that's
absolutely.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, so they shouldn't be allowed.
Yep.
And the police need to come down firmly on them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What a weekend since I was last here. The world's gone nuts.
Completely.
What's the feeling amongst our wonderful viewers and listeners?
Well, we were asking the question whether Donald Trump has made the world a safer place. And obviously, some will go, well, that's a weird thing to say after a man's just dropped a load of bombs on a country. But actually, I think he has made the world a safer place.
The fact remains, surely, that we say it every day, don't we? The mad mullahs of Iran have been financing terrorist groups, Hamas,
That's all they do. That's exactly what they do.
Hezbollah for ages.
Why is anyone running away from that? That's just obvious, isn't it?
And, you know, it's a bit like when, I mean, maybe different to a degree, but I remember when he said he attacked NATO and he said, I'm not going to pay for you lot to defend yourselves. Now, all of a sudden, each country's committing to paying 5% of GDP, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that means the world's a safer place. There's much he does that I don't like, but somebody had to take these people out.
Well, I think on this, you know, if you're bombing someone, a death cult regime.
Death cult regimes
like
a great
Iran,
way to,
and if you're taking away their capability to nuke the world.
Absolutely.
Why is that a bad thing?
And why does it come down to him? Starmer's still there going, oh, you know, they must go back to
able to
negotiate.
It's up to America to do this. And then David Lammy comes along, turns up about as welcome as measles, that fella.
A British national's been injured in Israel during missile attacks. You read that, and the RF has just evacuated 63 Brits from Israel to Cyprus. Got Sean Bell, brilliant military analyst, to explain it all, because, to be perfectly honest, I'm not the expert. He most definitely is. Lots on the Palestine Action terror group. Jack Elson will be with us. Migration Nation, do you know where you're paying hard to pay your bills? Rejected asylum seekers are still living in hotels. Did you know that?
Yeah, so you're rejected, but you remain.
Yeah. My story that jumped out this morning, even my wife said this to me, and she was in bed next to me for a change, not to you. Rochdale grooming gang ringleader Akari Abdul-Raf, do you know this? Is still living freely on the streets despite losing his rights. So he's a paedophile.
He literally lost an appeal to stay here. It's like, no, the appeal said you can't stay here, you're going to be deported. And he's still here. Years later.
Sums up the madness. And last but not least, it's very, very sad. Hickory Dickory Dock. Have you heard this? A simple nursery rhyme is making waves. Not for nostalgia, but because a puppet production of Hickory Dickory Dock at Islington's Little Angel Theatre, there's the surprise, is now carrying a trigger warning over a cat and mouse chase, saying it could cause distress to toddlers to see the poor little mouse being chased by a cat. Honestly, I don't know. On the one hand, Donald Trump has bombed Iran because they've got a nuclear weapon. And Islington Council are trying to ban Hickory Dickory Dock because they're a bunch of Hickory Dickory whatevers, because apparently the cat chasing the mouse could be a trigger warning for kids.
What about Humpty Dumpty?
When he fell off, he could have been disabled. He could have lost a leg.
Well, I think he already was
disabled.
Well, he was certainly obese.
Yes.
There's no egg.
And what about the magic roundabout? But my favourite is Balamory. When I was